Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku became the advocate. If you guys enjoy this movie, comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story 𝗵𝗲 from 𝗓𝗏. So let's start the video. Letter 1. To everyone it concerns, may it be heroes, police, or civilians, there is a villain group that society has failed to recognize. I've noticed the Hero Public Safety Commission ignoring the recent rise in small criminal organizations, or perhaps they aren't perceiving the same activity I am. Regardless, this community fueled by hatred and greed shouldn't be allowed to grow. Despite my certainty of its danger, the heroes seem to refuse to fight if what they're fighting for isn't held on a pedestal. That's why I will inform those around me. Their target is All Might. They are known as the League of Villains. They are subtly raising their presence in the underground, slowly gaining additional prisoners to use as their test subjects. Nobody has seemed to notice the connections between recent disappearances. Good people with strong quirks are going missing. Usually one on the first day of every month, and it has been this way for years. Do you not see the missing posters littering telephone poles, train stations, and bus stops? Have you been turning your head and thinking the heroes will help? Are you willing to tie a blindfold around your own eyes in order to keep up the facade of safety? I've counted the number of people the League has taken and decided to use as objects instead of human beings. Quirk experiments aren't all that uncommon. This should be, but isn't, common knowledge. The HPSC has decided to keep all of the world sheltered from truths for fear of backlash and poor reactions. But the longer they choose to lie and hide away the true dangers of humankind, the more dangerous they become. Our communities can't defend themselves if they don't know what they're defending against. I want to be able to hope and depend on the strength of heroes. Please find a way to help. I am. I hope you can notice these patterns on your own. Now, good luck. Sincerely, Kageno. It shouldn't take much effort to write a letter. There were only a few simple steps to Izuku's plan. Just a blueprint of his objective written in one of his notebooks. First, write the letter and label it. Decide later. He already had everything he needed to complete that step. Second, find somewhere safe to leave it where they can find it. That was the difficult part. The second phase required him to exit the warehouse and find a place where his father's men wouldn't see him leaving the note. Yes, he could use one of his quirks, but the safeguard quirk all for one applied to Izuku prevented him from doing so without alerting the aforementioned villain. He was to stay inside his room until the hero presence in their district decreased. Just as he labeled his letter, Letter 1, please give to heroes or police, and tucked it away in his pocket, he heard Shigaraki Tamura unlocking his door. He wasn't given time to ask questions before Shigaraki entered and spoke. "Sup, Zuko? You still in here sulking?" He walked in with his arms crossed and leaned against the wall near Izuku's desk. Midoriya's room was the average size of a one-person bedroom. He had a bed in one corner away from the metal door, and a simple steel desk in the opposing corner, both built into the flooring. His chair was plastic and filled with sand, and the only window was covered with concrete and paint. He had a couple of black and red markers, pens, and notebooks cluttering his desk. A cardboard box of clean clothes sat on the floor in front of his mattress. "What do you want?" Izuku grumbled as he started sorting belongings on his desk. "Don't get mad at me just because father stuck you in here." Tamura responded as he started his bad habit of scratching away the skin on his neck. "Stop. You just ran out of moisturizer." He pulled Shigaraki's hand away from his neck. "You're right. Sorry, I'm just getting cabin fever or something." He sighed. He was hoping Tamura would take him out for a walk. They used to go out more when All for One considered their domain more secure. "Well then, it's a good thing I need a new video game." Izuku looked up to see him smirking. He couldn't help but smile back. "You should get going before Kirigiri gets back from Dr. Yujiko's." "Yeah, thanks, Tamura." He grabbed the black face mask Shigaraki pulled from his pocket in power, walked out of his room, and continued until he was several meters away from their building. He slipped his hood and mask on and headed to Shigaraki's favorite game store. That specific game store often had an easygoing teenager working the front desk. They also worked cameras, who made it easy to shoplift long as you didn't make it obvious, and did it while they weren't looking. He quickly hid the game in his back pocket after making sure the worker was on their phone, and headed for a nearby drugstore. Said store had the only moisturizer Shigaraki was willing to use. He pulled out the money he needed to buy it, along with his letter. Shoplifting came easily to him, but if he paid, he had a chance to slip the note to the cashier. He grabbed the lotion and took a few deep breaths to settle his nerves. It had been a few years since he tried to get the help of heroes. This is stupid, he thought. You're wasting time. He shook his head to calm himself and kept his eyes on the ground as he set the bottle and money on the counter. He looked to his left and saw a tip jar. Perfect. Why would they remember a random teen putting a piece of paper in their tip jar? The cashier handed him his change and lotion. He grabbed the letter and dropped it into the jar along with a couple of cents he had. I did it. Autopilot turned on in his brain, and he only realized it when he found himself handing the lotion and video game to Tamura. He allowed himself to breathe once he collapsed onto his bed. Eraserhead walked into the police station, his steady hand securing a villain to prevent their escape. He was patrolling when he saw said criminal trying to mug a woman. He handed the villain over to the officer in charge of holding cells and started filling out the required report. Eraserhead, could we get some input from you? Ssakachi said when he saw Aizawa walk into the station. On. He motioned for the detective to continue. A convenience store worker found a note in their tip jar this afternoon. He sighed and took a sip of the coffee he was holding. Eraserhead noted his other hand held a manila folder. In my opinion, you could very well help us decipher what the writer's goal is. As the tired hero handed his report to a bright woman working at the front desk, Ssakachi handed him the folder and motioned to follow. As they walked into a secluded office, Ssakachi deflated onto one of the chairs, rubbing his temples. Long night? Eraser asked the detective as he leaned against the desk to the right of Ssakachi, opening the manila folder. Yeah, a lot of new cases since it's Friday. The workers in the store I mentioned earlier weren't paying attention to the customers, and the cameras didn't catch the writer's face, so we don't know who he is. He took another sip. Why is it important to find out who he is? Eraser saw 3 papers in the folder. First, a photocopy of the presumed note. Second, a report from the cashier. And third, Ssakachi's report on the case. He turned back to the note. The note was troublesome, but Eraser didn't see a need to panic or immediately schedule a hunt. We need to find out more from the writer, he said, setting down the folder. My point exactly, Ssakachi set his empty cup down as he stood up. I was wondering how flexible your patrol routes are. You want me to find him through my patrols? He knew the answer, so he phrased it like a statement. Yes, he picked up the folder and flipped to the page of his report. We have some clue on what routes he took to arrive at the store, so I was wondering if you would investigate them. He picked up a printed map from his desk. Cameras picked him up here, here, and here, he said, circling spots that Eraser recognized as alleyways. He was very careful about showing his face. Eraserhead nodded as the detective put away the folder minus the map, sighing. I'll transfer the camera footage to you. Are you off duty for now? Ssakachi asked as he turned back to the hero. No, I'm currently supposed to be patrolling, but I had to bring in that robber. He motioned to the office door. For a few hours, until I'm free, I can lurk the streets around here, he said as he took the map that was handed to him and pointed to the circled alleys. Thanks, Eraser. It would also think maybe Nezu could help by analyzing the handwriting. Hearing the stout's name made the hero shudder. You're asking me to talk to that rat? He raised an eyebrow. Just email a picture of the note to him, or give him a copy. Tell him to email me. The detective flashed a smile that dropped when Aizawa's glare hardened. Fine, he grumbled as he folded up the map to hide it in his pocket. I'll go check out those spots. They exchanged nods as farewell, and Aizawa left the detective to his own devices to recommence his patrol. Letter 2. Hi, police. I see you've sixed Eraserhead on me. Although I'm not surprised, I'd prefer it if you would tell him to leave. I don't understand why he was sent, but I can tell you that I know who he was sent for. He picks up any paper that he sees. It's not very discreet, but I'll give him props since I've gotten pretty close to running into him a few times, so I have some recommendations. Eraser, first of all, I don't know if you prefer being called Eraserhead or Aizawa Shouta, so I hope it's alright if I use both from now on. This is what I suggest you do to enhance your hero work. I assume that because your quirk requires you to keep your eyes open for an extended period, you have some sort of dry eye. Your goggles are very useful for concealing which villain's quirk you're canceling and which you aren't, but they could also be accustomed to help you with said dry eye. I've designed a prototype where the goggles have a mist function. Though I can't just hand it over, I will say this. It is not, by far, fully functional and perfect, but I recommend listening at the least. If you attach a small water container to make it appear as a hearing aid, there's a way you can redesign your goggles to keep your eyes damp. You are able to attach sized mist producers in the nose so that they aim toward your eyes. Simple solution. I honestly thought of this minutes after seeing you the first time. I would think that a teacher at UA would be more insightful. No. Sincerely, Kageno at around 1 am. About a week after the police received the letter, Midoriya went out for a short walk with Shigaraki. They turned a corner on the way home and saw a man in all black. He was turned away from them, bent over to pick something up. Izuku noticed the shaggy hair and clothes, a tangled scarf around his neck, and a belt with various pockets. He immediately stopped Tomura and motioned for them to turn around. "What happened? Did you recognize him?" He rasped out and started scratching his neck. Izuku cringed at the too familiar sight of Tomura peeling off his dry skin. He gently nudged the taller man's wrist as a way to get him to stop. "Quit it," he hissed as they continued walking. "Yeah, I think he was a hero." He led Tomura the long way back to their building. "Who?" When the boy didn't respond, he grabbed the back of Izuku's shirt, making sure he doesn't touch all fingers to his shirt, halting him so a stop. "It's not important," he grabbed his shirt away from Tomura, despite the older's scoff. "Yeah, it is. We need to tell Sensei." "No," the protest blurred out before Izuku himself got a chance to stop it. He turned and started walking as he saw Tomura's confusion turn into anger. He shifted to a slower pace when the man following didn't immediately lose his temper. "Izu, what the fuck? Are you trying to defend that stupid hero?" He spits out the words with a venom-laced tone. Izuku felt a shred of relief as their building came closer and into sight. He wanted to get away from Tomura before he had another tantrum. "Are you gonna answer me?" Tomura slammed the door shut behind him when they entered the warehouse. His nails were already attacking his neck. "Look, I can talk to you about this, and I will." His shoulders let off some tension when Tomura's scratching slowed. "But I'm not going to right now. You're upset, and I think you should cool off first." After he lowly growled a fine, Izuku immediately ran to his room. "Of fucking course the police would send a hero after me." He closed his door, sat down at his desk, and started writing. "Fuck this. I'm gonna use my quirk. Well, only if I have to." He wasn't thinking it through, at all. But he was annoyed Tomura could have figured out what he'd done. He had interacted with heroes. It didn't matter that it was indirectly. He broke the biggest rule ever given to him. Taunting Eraserhead probably wouldn't get rid of him, at least not permanently. But maybe he would drop Izuku's case. He had to try. When Izuku realized his door wasn't locked by Tomura, he ran out to where he saw Eraser earlier. After a few minutes of looking, he found himself climbing a fire escape. Eraser seemed to be stalking the alleys from rooftops. Izuku quickly folded his note into an impromptu paper airplane. He smirked as he thought about his plan. It's all about timing. It had been 16 days since the first letter was found, and Eraserhead was becoming increasingly frustrated. 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐻 needed more information on the villain league that Kageno referenced. He had been taking a daily detour through the alleys 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐻 circled on the map. He typically only spent 15-20 minutes lingering, looking for sight of Kageno's letters, or maybe the person himself. Walking to his normal vantage point, Eraserhead decided to pick up a folded piece of paper he saw on the ground next to a garbage can. He occasionally did this, but only when the paper resembled that of Kageno's letter. He unfolded the paper to see a scrambled mess of writing or scribbles that he couldn't read. Not from Kageno. He threw the paper into the trash, sighing. This section of his daily patrol seemed pointless. He hadn't seen any criminals or heroes and rarely saw people passing. It wasn't abandoned, per se, but the alleys he usually found himself in weren't on the way to anything. Other, quicker, streets could lead someone to more public places. He reached the roof he usually waited on. It was on an apartment building, and allowed him a fair amount of visibility in regard to where he needed to look. As he scanned the dimly lit alleyways, he could have sworn he heard snickering from behind him. He turned but didn't see anything. The building he was standing on didn't have public access to the roof, so he assumed it was the sound of a raccoon foraging. As he looked at his watch, 1:26 am staring back at him, something light bumped his skull. He whipped his head around, quirk turned on by impulse, and saw nothing. He looked everywhere he could for an explanation before turning to the concrete beneath him. When he saw it, he activated his quirk in irritation. A paper airplane. One of the wings had letter 2 scrawled boldly on it. He quickly shoved the note into his pocket and ran to find whoever threw it at his head. Jumping to solid ground, he looked around him, gripping his capture weapon tightly when he heard the light tapping of someone's feet. That someone turned a corner, and when Eraserhead followed behind Kageno, he found nothing. "Kageno!" Exasperated, he called out. "Why is he running?" Eraserhead was annoyed. Yes, but Kageno didn't do anything illegal. The hero wasn't going to arrest him. He pulled himself up to the rooftops once again, still looking around. He looked down and saw a glimpse of what looked like forest green hair running in a somewhat distant alley. It was close enough to tell that he hadn't used his quirk to get away from Eraser, just his running. He turned a corner away from Eraser and disappeared. Eraserhead had continued looking for Kageno for quite some time before giving up and heading to the police station, where 𝗧𝗏 greeted him. As Eraser poured a cup of coffee for himself, he began speaking. "He wrote another letter, and I saw him in person." As he handed the note to 𝗧𝗏, he took a long sip of his well-deserved cup of caffeine. He saw 𝗧𝗏 quickly read the letter and sigh. "I'm guessing you haven't read it yet." 𝗧𝗏 set the letter down and raised an eyebrow. "No, I haven't had time to." "Why?" He picked up the letter and scanned through it. Simple solution. 𝗧𝗏 could feel Eraserhead's irritation building up as he finished reading. "How the hell does he know my name?" Eraserhead was very rarely recognized, and a few amount of people knew Aizawa Shouta was Eraserhead. He was frustrated. "Why don't you give me your report about tonight?" he said as he switched out the letter in Eraserhead's hands for an encounter statement. A report for when the police or a hero comes across an individual of unknown morality or occupation. To put it simply, a report for when a person that isn't known to be a vigilante, villain, murderer, robber, civilian, victim, etc., interacts with an officer or a hero. As Eraserhead begins filling out the report, he also explains to 𝗧𝗏 what happened. "I'm starting to question how old Kageno is. Before, I thought he was around our age based on how he spoke in his letter, but I'm not sure." The detective contemplated as Eraser finished his report. "If I may, I will help you decipher his letters." Nedzu chirped. Eraserhead and 𝗧𝗏 jumped when he suddenly appeared and spoke. "When the hell did you get here?" Eraser grumbled. "The same time you did." He beamed. After some time with the three of them speaking, they decided the best choice for their next course of action. Nedzu advocated for Aizawa to follow the adjustments Kageno put forth, and he contacted US Support Course to help with designing the goggles. And, they decided, Eraserhead won't be leaving Kageno alone. Letter 3. This letter should be in the police station's grasp by now. But if not, please hand it in. This one is mainly for Eraserhead. "Congratulations, Aizawa. You got new goggles. I'm glad you followed my advice." "That piece of advice, at least. I watched some CCTV footage of your recent fights, and I see it has benefited you. You seem to be able to keep your quirks open for a longer period of time than before. You should also consider keeping more supplies in your belt, such as protein bars. You don't seem to have an ideal sustainability regarding energy. Maybe you should sleep more. I see you haven't left my general area. I really hoped you would stop lingering so close to me. I suppose I should have given you a reason to leave, though. You seem to have caught the League's eye. One of the main members saw you. Right now, he's doing research and asking around for information on you. Obviously, he hasn't found much yet, because he's not asking the right questions. I urge you to leave before he finds out who you are. I made up a lie when he asked me, but I'm not good at lying. He can tell. I don't have much time to stall him before he tries to send someone after you. Please leave. Sincerely." Kageno Izuku was exhausted. He hadn't been doing much work, but he was mentally drained, and he wasn't sure what to do anymore. He had avoided interacting with 𝗵𝗲 for the past few days. He didn't want to make up excuses or lie about who the hero was. His room isn't exactly soundproof. So he heard the older man screeching about finding that damn hero Izuku is so protective of. He didn't want All for One to find out Eraserhead was near them and sequentially gain his quirk. He had gone out again to pick up even more moisturizer because 𝗵𝗲 can't seem to take a break. He had to duck away from Eraserhead on the way to and from the store. But doing so allowed him to see that Eraserhead's goggles were a different design than he had on before. When he got back, nobody was there to greet him, so he left the lotion on the bar and entered his room. He was content without talking to Shigaraki for the day. He grabbed the laptop he was allowed to use and immediately went to research the hero's recent fights. He checked his notes. Usually Eraserhead would stop a villain's quirk for a maximum of 23 seconds. But the goggles had significantly increased that time. 34 seconds, he wrote. Despite the change, he was disappointed that the adjustments he suggested changed so little. He was jumped out of signing his most recent letter when he heard a harsh yell. He instinctively slammed his laptop and notebook shut, waiting to hear what 𝗵𝗲 was mad about this time. Muffled as always, a voice spoke. Shigaraki 𝗵𝗲, I think it would be helpful if you let me know what's wrong. Kurogiri, trying to calm him down. Good luck with that. Are you an idiot? He heard the sound of glass shattering. I haven't seen Izuku all day. He's avoiding me because of that stupid hero. He suppressed a groan when he heard his name come into the conversation. His cue to do what nobody seemed able of. His door wasn't locked, so he left his laptop on his bed and went to leave. He quickly ripped the letter out of his book and stuffed it in his pocket. He opened his door, an action Kurogiri noticed instantly. Midoriya Izuku, Kurogiri said as he walked out into the open area of their building. He saw the mist man standing behind an island, 𝗵𝗲 opposing him with Kurogiri's nice glasses being threatened. Izuku, what the hell? You haven't talked to me all day. He slammed the glasses down and stomped over to where Midoriya was. I'm sorry, I got distracted. I got you some more lotion though? He hesitantly tried to change the topic, flinching when 𝗵𝗲 threw his hands up in frustration. I know, you're fine with going out and buying stuff. You couldn't bother to talk to me though, could you? He whined, scratching his neck. Hey, I didn't mean to ignore you. He lightly grabbed 𝗵𝗲's hand to pull it away from the man's neck. Do you want to play a game together? What can I do to make it up to you? When the man snatched his hand away, Izuku took a step back in case 𝗵𝗲 wanted to throw a tantrum. Tell me who the fuck that hero is and how you know him. That will make it up to me. He crossed his arms and stared down at Izuku, glaring despite the boy's nervousness. He kept fidgeting with his hoodie. Well, I don't really. No. I just know he's a hero, I guess. I've seen some of his, footage, and I know he isn't a vigilante because he sticks around after he apprehends the villains. He trailed off, becoming more anxious as 𝗵𝗲's glare didn't falter. Then I suppose your computer won't have any information, will it? Kurogiri cut in, always knowing exactly what to say to make Izuku's nerves skyrocket. No, it won't. He stood his ground, trying to stop fiddling with his hoodie strings. Is there anything else, 𝗵𝗲? My game controller broke, as Shigaraki whined. Izuku frowned when he looked to his right and saw a disintegrated controller on the ground. It's okay, can I get you another? He eyed Kurogiri as the man took some money out of the stash he kept for situations like this. Yeah, he growled and lumbered to his usual spot on the couch. Izuku bought the controller he needed and began walking home, wearing his regular mask and hoodie. He passed a fight on his way and saw a few police officers standing around doing nothing. He pulled the note out of his pocket, tugging his hood even lower on his head. As he inched closer to the scene, he saw one of the officers' patrol car. When the officer saw the attack, he pulled over and ran into the fight straight away, not bothering to close the door. He leaned closer to the open door and threw the folded paper inside, closing the door. As he went to turn away from the ruckus, he looked up and saw a camera. The light was blinking red and green, pointing straight into his eyes. He felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He felt a breeze. His fucking hood fell off. Of course he had to go out on a windy day. He panicked, pulling his hood on and rushing back to his building. He wanted to hide under his weighted blanket and shut away from 𝗵𝗲. He didn't want to have to lie. It was so tiring. He broke another rule. First, by interacting with heroes. Second, by lying and hiding things. Third, by being seen. He ran into the building, holding back tears. Izu, did something happen? Tomura looked up from the TV and Izuku dropped the new controller next to him. No. He ran to his room and slid down to the floor. Don't cry. Please don't cry. Give him some time. Kurogiri was muffled through his door. He will come to you when he's ready. He stopped listening, trying to think of something other than how he keeps breaking rules. He buried his face in his hands and stopped holding back his tears. Eraserhead let out a sigh. 𝗧𝗏𝗁 had been given letter 3 after an officer found it in his car, and the detective passed it on to the hero. The letter was very adamant about Erased leaving. Kageno seemed to be getting increasingly confusing every time Eraser saw the kid. He didn't see a need for leaving so urgently. He was 29. He could defend himself against a few villains. He had shown up near the same electronic shop as when they had seen him first. They saw him walking with his head down, and then he put his letter in the patrol car and shut the door. A few steps away from the car, he looked up to the camera and his hood was blown off. His green hair and eyes were shown, giving them a notion of what he looked like. His eyes widened in fear before he hurriedly pulled his hood back up and ran out of the camera's sight. He didn't understand why the kid was afraid to be seen. He could understand wanting to stay anonymous, but fear? He wasn't a wanted criminal, so why would he hide his face? Being afraid didn't make sense. It worried him. Sometimes he acts like he doesn't care, such as when he expelled his whole class of hero students on the first day. But he only did that because he cared. If he had let them fulfill their dreams of becoming heroes, they would have gotten hurt or killed. He was snapped out of his fretting when Nedzu spoke. Aizawa, he nodded from the doorway of the station. I caught wind that another note was found. Aizawa handed him the letter. Yeah, we also saw him. On camera, I mean. He took a sip of his coffee. May I see the footage? As Nedzu headed over to stand on the chair next to Aizawa, the tired man opened the laptop he was using earlier to view the footage. They clicked play and watched the footage over a few times before Nedzu spoke again. He may be part of the League, he said. The way he spoke in his letters implied that he had close contact with the heads of the organization. Though, this doesn't mean he wants to be with them. Through his notes, I assume he wants to help us, not them. Nedzu turned to the other hero and waited for a response. He seems like a smart kid. The edits he gave for Eraser's goggles were clever. If he needs it, I want to help him as much as we can. He saw 𝗧𝗏𝗁 smirk from his desk behind Nedzu. In return, the hero glared. We will, Nedzu reassured and hopped off the chair he was standing on. All we can do right now is wait until Kageno contacts us. If you see him in person, try to talk to him. The stoat nodded as he finished speaking. They bid their farewells and Aizawa sat down to contemplate what he could do to try and find more about Kageno. I don't understand why heroes have to be so stubborn. I thought I made it clear how unsafe it is for Eraserhead to stay in this area. But I guess not. That's fine. They're moving to a different building soon, so they'll forget about you eventually. I don't advise you to try and find them, but I assume you're not going to listen to that, either. Think about this, I decide to risk a lot by informing the police of a small villain league that's rising up. It seems like nothing's going wrong, until a pro hero comes to my area and almost gets both of us discovered. Try telling the hero to screw off. I don't want to see that hero get hurt. He's one of the good ones. The hero doesn't listen. I tried one more time to get him to leave, but guess what? I slipped up and got myself caught. Maybe it wasn't all in vain though, because the hero could still leave in time. Nope, he didn't. Why? Because heroes don't listen. Maybe you shouldn't push your luck any more than you have. Seems like the League of Villains isn't doing too great, though. They haven't raised any new members recently. Hooray. I'm not going to be able to write these letters for some time. But if something happens that I think you need to know, I will find a way to inform you. Once again, good luck. Sincerely, Kageno Izuku sat on his bed, his back nestled into the corner. His arms hugged his knees close, hiding his face as much as he could. He kept his head down when he heard a knock on the door. Midoriya Izuku, Kurogiri walked in. Your father has summoned you. He looked up and saw the man open a portal in the doorway. When Kurogiri motioned for Izuku to follow, he kept his eyes on the ground and obeyed. They sauntered into the dingy space All for One resided in. The beeping of medical equipment reverberated around the room. "You may leave," he waved Kurogiri away, and Izuku watched as the man nodded and disappeared through his warp. "Izuku," the man grinned under his oxygen mask. "I'm sure you know why you're here." When the boy didn't respond, All for One's grin dropped. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." His eyes snapped up to meet the face of the man before him. "I thought you would have been more trustworthy, dear." He sighed. It was an accident. I'm sorry," he murmured. "I thought we spoke about this mumbling habit of yours," he voiced in a disappointed tone. "Right. Well, I didn't mean to show him my face." As he spoke more loudly, he fiddled with his zipper. "What were you doing out there in the first place?" he spat. "You put some sort of paper in that patrol car. Now, do you want to explain, or do you want me to find out my way?" He raised injured skin where his eyebrow once lay. "I'll explain." His eyes widened. I wrote a note to the police. A hero was in our area and he fumbled his words. "I was trying to get him to leave us alone, I guess." "You guess?" he chuckled. Izuku bristled at the sound. "Well, I did do that, yeah. I like the place we're living now, and I don't want to move." "That's too bad," the man hummed. "I found a better spot for you three." "But," he exasperated. "Excuse me." Izuku clasped his hands around his mouth when he realized what he said. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." He mumbled through his hands as he shook his head, squeezing his eyes shut. "I suppose I should be lenient," he exhaled. "Your 13th birthday is coming up soon, yes?" The boy nodded, dropping his hands. "I suppose a rebellious streak should have been expected. You're an adolescent, after all." He test. "Let us discuss this later on. Kurogiri, come." When he beckoned, the mist man appeared behind Izuku with a portal. "To the new hideout, sir?" His glowing eyes thinned in question. "Yes, and proceed with the arrangements I brought up earlier." "Yes, sir." Izuku didn't hear the rest of the conversation as he lumbered through the portal, Kurogiri coming soon after him. "Gather your belongings, Midoriya Izuku," he said. "I understand." He made his way to his room. He made sure Kurogiri left to talk to Tamura before hurrying to prepare his 4th letter, ripping a piece of paper out of the notebook and folding it into his pocket. He grabbed his best pen, putting it with the paper. He quickly stuffed his clothes into the box at the foot of his bed, placing the laptop and notebooks on top. He had gone through this process multiple times before. He was familiar with what to do. "Leave your box here. I want to talk outside, okay?" Izuku hesitantly left the box on his bed and followed Tamura out into the alley. "What did Sensei want to see you for?" He tilted his head to the side in question. They walked to continue their conversation. "I accidentally showed my face to a camera a few days ago," he mumbled, fidgeting with the paper in his pocket. "What?" Shigaraki looked around and protectively pulled up Izuku's hood. "You idiot. I knew I should have kept you inside more," he mumbled and started scratching his neck. Izuku brought his eyes from the ground and looked up to the roofs. He locked eyes with Eraserhead and his brows furrowed. "What are you looking at?" Shigaraki said under his breath. "Nothing." Izuku distracted him and brought him into a hug before he could look up at Eraser. "I like this place. I don't want to leave." When Tamura hesitantly hugged him back, Izuku brought the paper and pen out of his pocket, waving them to show Eraserhead before letting go of Shigaraki. "You're weird, Izu. The other place will be fine." He pushed away. "Let's go. That idiot inside is probably waiting." "You're right," he smiled. "I'll come in a second. I need a breather." When Tamura turned to go back inside, Izuku looked back at Eraser, who was in the same spot. He rushed to write a letter, trying to still his shaking hands. He rolled the paper into a ball and threw it at the hero, who caught it without breaking eye contact. Izuku walked inside after flipping him off. "Well, shit," he thought. He saw my face. He gritted his teeth and gathered his box. His laptop was gone, unsurprising since he broke multiple rules. He tried to not think about the fact Eraserhead was so close to his building. "Player 2, let's go," Shigaraki whined from his doorway. The boy noted that he put on his family's hands. "All right, I'm ready. Sorry, Tamura." He ran a hand through his hair and entered Kurogiri's new warp. A bar. Eraser was hopping across roofs on his way to the police station when he saw movement in the alleys through his peripheral vision. He turned his body to get a better view and saw two people. When one of them shouted and pulled up the hood of the other, he realized one of them was Kageno. The familiar sight of his hoodie was enough to recognize the kid. The other one was a shabby-looking man, around his early 20s. He was wearing all black, shaggy clothes and was persistently scraping the skin off his neck. He made eye contact with Kageno, noticing that the kid wasn't wearing his mask. When the other man went to look at the hero, the green-headed kid distracted him with a hug. They exchanged some words and the shabby man went inside a building. They took a mental note of where he was so he could report back to 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐻 later. Kageno scribbled something down on paper, crumpled it up, and threw the paper at Eraser. The kid gave him the bird and entered through the same door. Eraser pinched the bridge of his nose, sending a text to 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐻 that he got another note and quickly opened it. When he finished the letter, he carefully folded it and placed it in his pocket. His eyebrows furrowed, and he felt himself getting a headache. He had been building more theories on the living situation of Kageno. But when he saw the boy's entire face, Eraser realized he was younger than they thought. It made most of said theories irrelevant. His bone structure was only somewhat developed, with his face housing a button nose and littered with freckles. He looked to be 10 or 11. Eraser hopped onto solid ground, taking a shortcut to the station and fastening his pace. He had a bad feeling about leaving the kid alone, especially after he said he got caught. When Eraser entered the station, he swiftly went through the routine of grabbing an encounter report and pouring himself a cup of coffee. 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐻 saw him when he signed his hero and civilian name at the bottom of the report. "Eraser," he greeted. "Can I see the letter?" The hero handed him the note and began explaining what happened. Nezu joined them after 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐻 sent him a notice about the new becomings of Kageno. "The kid flipped me off," he said as he finished, taking a sip of coffee. "There was an excessive amount of force used on this paper," the principal said, motioning to the wrinkled note. He was experiencing genuine frustration. "I want to check out the building." They went inside. Aizawa yawned. "But we would need a warrant, wouldn't we?" "We don't need a warrant if they let you in," 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐻 said. "You two seem to be forgetting the boy was very worried about your well-being." Nezu grinned. "I have my connections. I can get a warrant." "We don't have any evidence of criminal activity in the building," 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐻 questioned the man. "Not a problem." He stood up and placed his hands behind his back. "I'll be back soon." When Nezu swiftly came back, he held a warrant in his hands, as promised. The men didn't question it. Call me if you need backup, I guess." 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐻 read over the paper and handed it to Eraser. "Yup." The hero went directly for the building he was at prior. He stood in front of the door he saw earlier, knocking. "Hey, I'm with the police. Open up," he said, caffeine already wearing off. After a minute of waiting, he checked the door handle and felt that it wasn't locked. He opened it and found himself in an empty room. The door was in a corner, adjacent to two others. A worn-down couch sat in front of a TV stand. Dust showing a television was recently removed. There was a kitchen, cleaner than the rest of the room, cabinets and fridge empty. Nothing else was in the room, so he went to take a look at the doors. The first one he saw had a lock on the outside and a minimalistic design inside. He saw the outline of a window, but it seemed to be embedded with cement. The room had a bathroom connected to it, containing 2 sinks, but 1 shower and toilet. A Jack and Jill bathroom, with a different door connecting to the second room. He entered to see a dark room, trash scattered about with no care regarding cleanliness. He stepped over multiple empty noodle packets before he reached the exit, seeing that this room had a lock on the inside. He walked out to the alley, sighing because he had found nothing. Remembering how Kageno said that they were moving, and how the kid was in that building, he figured that Kageno was of some significance to the League. Maybe they could find someone like him in the police database. "Dear Yuha High School, upgrade your security. I got inside the campus and out with practically no problem, only using a quirk 3 times. Your barriers only account for people walking in, providing little to no safety concerning teleportation or warp quirks. The only things you have for that are sensors and alarms. I figure you should correct that going forward. Something is happening at the unforeseen simulation joint sometime this week. But that's all I know. Be careful, P.S. I'm sorry I triggered the alarm. I heard them talking about All Might and the 𝐬𝐽𝐽𝐵 blah blah. I got worried and decided to alert you. Sorry. Sincerely, Kageno. So, you've chosen your name. Yes. All for One looked down on Izuku from where he was sitting. What do you mean? He hesitantly stepped closer as his father motioned for him to. The letters. You signed as Kageno. I assume that's your chosen name. Oh. Yeah, sure. He stared at his hands and picked at the cuticles. What do you think your punishment is going to be? The man before him tilted his head. Something like before? He flinched when All for One laughed, the man's sadistic grin making Izuku shudder. You think your past punishments fit this? The boy's eyes widened. Oh, Izuku, I thought I raised you to be smarter than this. He sighed. You tried to get 𝗵𝗲 caught. I'm disappointed. I thought you cared more about him. I do. He looked up at his father. Oh, the man smiled again. Well then, the punishment should fit the crime, yes? Izuku solemnly nodded. Kurogiri, bring him to the gray room, he said into the monitor that was used to call the Mist Man. Izuku stepped away from the portal as it opened next to him. Father, he pleaded. You disobeyed. You knew this would happen. He spat. Be smarter, boy. Let's go, young master, Kurogiri said as he ushered Izuku into the portal. Kurogiri led Izuku to the gray room in their new hideout. Your father has told me you should expect additional discipline, he said. Thanks, Kurogiri. Tell Tamu I'm sorry, please? Kurogiri nodded and locked him inside the room. It was small, the size of an average master bathroom, with dreary paint covering the walls. The room was always the same in every place they lived. Concrete floors and walls, steel doors with no handles on the inside, and a single light embedded in the ceiling above the doorway. The name was dubbed to it after Izuku's first time seeing it. The 6-year-old, having a limited vocabulary, didn't know what else to call it. Izuku sat in the corner, facing the door. It was exactly how he remembered. Cold, and the only thing that was with him was a scratchy blanket, accompanied by one flat pillow. There was already a styrofoam tray next to the pillow, holding tamagoyaki. He often woke up to a tray of food, typically traditional Japanese dishes due to All for One's preferences. When he was younger, he spent a lot of time in gray rooms. That was the punishment he got when he said something bad. He got different punishments for different wrongdoings. For example, if he spoke about heroes, All for One might hurt one that he liked. Others were more physical. He fell asleep in the corner while thinking of what punishments he might receive. As a kid, he had spent a few days at a time in the gray room. The longest he had ever spent was 22 days. But 𝗵𝗲 snuck over to him and talked to him through the door so he wouldn't be so lonely. That didn't happen this time. He was there for 31 days, he thought. It's hard to ascertain when the only light you have is on at all times and having no way to tell time. Izuku was in the same corner, recounting his scars as a way to pass time. He was both relieved and worried when his door opened, relief dominating when 𝗵𝗲 was standing in the doorway. I don't know why you were in here for so long, but Sensei said we can let you out now. He held out a hand, pinky finger kept glued to his palm, to help Izuku up. Thank you, Tamu. He pulled himself up. Sensei said you're grounded. Or something so you can't go outside or be alone or anything. What'd you do to piss him off so much? He tilted his head to the side in query. I kinda have the hero's tips in how to, make their fighting better. He muttered, looking at the ground as they walked down the hallway. I thought you stopped doing that shit. He raised his voice, throwing his hands up in frustration. I haven't ever done this before though. They entered the bar, Izuku seeing Kurogiri wiping off one of his crystal glasses. I meant hero shit. He scratched the back of his hand, sitting down on a stool. I thought you wanted to be in the League of Villains with me. He pouted. I just told them that so they could level up, you know? They weren't a very strong hero. He knew what words to use to make 𝗵𝗲 content. You're so smart. He ruffled Izuku's hair as the kid sat down. But you should save up your XP for the boss fights. You're right, he smiled. He looked around the bar and noticed no changes other than the dartboard to his left. It had a picture of All Might pinned to it with a dagger. With a Namu, we won't even have to fight that boss. He snickered. Young master, Kurogiri interrupted the two from his position behind the counter. Sensei requests you stay with him for a few months. What? Why are you taking my player too? Tumira stood up and yelled into the monitor, which displayed sound only in bold purple text. Hush, now. He will only be with me for training, Tumira. The voice echoed out of the speakers. It shouldn't take long, your player too will swiftly be returned to you. Izuku loathed when they spoke about him as if he wasn't there and listening, in the manner that made him sound like an object. I just got him back. The man whined and scratched his neck, quitting when Izuku mouthed stop. You have to do your own quest, Tamu. It's okay. Izuku stood up and hugged him. Using the nickname often soothed the man. Tumira mumbled some words Izuku couldn't hear, and pushed him away when Kurogiri opened a warp gate next to them. Izuku waved goodbye and grudgingly stepped through the purple mist. After months of planning, Izuku stood at the gates of UA, suddenly more aware of the paper and pencil in his back pocket. It was around lunchtime. The students shouldn't be outside walking around, so it was a good time to execute his plan. He told Tumira he was taking a kind shower so he could relax, and he would be out in 30 minutes or so. They didn't question it, so Izuku had plenty of time. He possessed a teleportation quirk. It simply transferred him to where he wanted as long as he could see said place. The limitations were well explored. He couldn't use it too much, or it would misfire, and he would be transported to the wrong place. He used a loophole of the quirk to get there, a little oddity he found through experimentation. He could use pictures to get to and from locations. All he had to do was snatch a photo or two that Tumira had gotten from the internet, and he was good to go. He was frustrated it was that simple after waiting so long for his chance to get there. After he got back from training with All for One, which, by the way, was not as simple as the man made it sound, he overheard Shigaraki talking about a NPC at UA who told them All Might was gonna work the new school year. He tried eavesdropping a couple more times to no avail, only hearing the words unforeseen simulation joint and Namu. But he knew that the Nomus were making very concerning progress. He messed around for a couple months, attempting to convince his father that he wasn't going to try anything if he went outside. All for One didn't care for Izuku's pleading, and only extended the grounding. Izuku had the quirk, which alerted All for One if he used his quirk, removed when the man decided he wanted to use a physical punishment as well. Being given a quirk was one thing, but having one taken away felt like the marrow was slowly being stripped from his bones. He pulled himself out of his thoughts to recenter and think about the task at hand. He stepped forward and activated his quirk, teleporting him onto orange crimson bricks leading to the front door. Immediately, the sensors and cameras noticed him. He flinched when the sirens started blaring, covering his ears. He watched as thick barriers shot up, alarms still beeping. Izuku tugged the picture he used earlier out of his pocket, ending up in the same spot as earlier. He bitterly pulled out the other paper, quickly writing a note. He wished UA had better safety measures in place, for the students' sakes. Plucking a sheet from his hoodie, he peeled off a frowny face sticker and used it to attach his note to the blue archway in front of him. He saluted to the camera on said archway and pulled out his flip phone. It was for emergencies, his only contact being Tumira. All for One made it impossible to call anyone but Shigaraki, so he was trusted with it. Earlier, he snagged a picture of his room so he could get back with relative ease. He looked up from the photo when the sirens stopped and the barrier lowered, suspicious of the sudden change. When he saw Hound Dog belting towards him from inside the campus, he promptly activated his quirk once more and fled. He got to his room and soaked his hair with water as insurance, then sat down on his bed and thought about the plan of action going forward. Eraserhead didn't know who he was expecting when the alarms went off, but it wasn't Kageno. The kid had been Mia since September. The police marked his file as cold as it had been 7 months since they saw him last. He and Tsukachi dug through the police's data for a kid like Kageno, but the only kid they saw that could have been him was quirkless. He had been missing for 9 years, disappearing at age 5 when his mother was killed. He was presumed dead due to his quirklessness. Most kidnapped kids who were quirkless died soon after being taken. Other than the kid, Midoriya Izuku, they didn't find any kids with green hair, eyes, and freckles in the age range of 11-14. He was trying to take a quick name during his lunch break when the alarms went off. Someone had tripped the intruder detectors, and every speaker in the school was blasting the same sentences repeatedly. There has been a level 3 security breach. All students please evacuate outdoors promptly. I repeat, nobody had breached level 3 in years. He slightly panicked. He immediately secured his capture weapon and went to the front of the school. He saw no villains. He looked around the premise surrounding the main building, still seeing nothing. The rest of the staff stayed searching around campus, but he returned to the interior of the school. When 𝗫𝗠 met him at the front gates, he pressed buttons on a remote he was holding, which silenced the alarms and lowered the barrier. He saw Hound Dog racing towards something behind the campus walls. Eraser looked at him, confused, and followed when the principal smiled and stepped outside UA grounds. The tired hero briefly saw a figure, but it disappeared before he could make out any defining traits. The guidance counselor lifted 𝗫𝗠 up for him to grab a piece of paper stuck to the pillar in front of them. "I see," he chuckled as he read the paper. "What is it?" Eraser tried to peek at the paper, but it was flipped to show him the sticker at the top and the signature. "I saw Kageno on the cameras." He handed Aizawa the letter and began walking towards the building. Aizawa reread the letter multiple times by the time they reached 𝗫𝗠's office. He mentioned the students being called by Yamada and Mimiri, and said Aizawa needn't worry. Kageno, in the letter, was being his normal, cocky self. But there were multiple things he found concerning regarding the letter. He was a cryptic, they knew, yet he still seemed different than his usual. He underlined warp quirks, indicating they needed to be more cautious of those. Another was that it seemed the League was going to break into UA. Kageno warned them to be more secure, mentioned something happening at the US soon, and they were possibly targeting All Might. He also didn't say his quirk, he said a quirk. Aizawa didn't have a clue what that connoted. "Would you like to view the footage?" 𝗫𝗠 motioned to his computer screen. "Yeah, sure." He deposited the letter on the principal's desk and walked to stand behind him. 𝗫𝗠 pressed play, and they watched as the kid, wearing the same gray hoodie and black mask, suddenly appeared at the front of the UA gates. He stood there for a couple seconds, and then teleported to stand on the walkway. He flinched and stood there for about 10 seconds, looking around with his hands blocking his ears. He looked down at the paper he had in his hand and sent himself of the campus as once more. Leaning against the arch, he hastily wrote the letter. After he stuck it to the column, he looked into the camera, which was pointed directly at him. He performed a 2-finger salute before pulling out a flip phone. When the alarms were stopped, Kageno stiffened. Exactly when Hound Dog came into his field of vision, his eyes widened and he disappeared. 𝗫𝗠 paused the video, making eye contact with Aizawa. "Are you going to call off the US trips?" the teacher asked. "Perhaps not." The rat's smile dropped for a second, reappearing when he spoke again. "They will know something caused us to cancel them. We also don't know if anything will indeed happen. That's shitty. It's putting the students in danger." He scowled at the thought of one of his students getting hurt. "I will arrange for more staff to accompany you. I reckon, if the League of Villains is coming, Kageno might join," he said, attempting to bribe Aizawa into keeping the unforeseen simulation joint in his schedule. "Yeah, sure. I'm still telling my class villains might attack. He would prefer if his class of teenagers didn't have to fight criminals. But having a chance to bring in Kageno would be nice." "Perfect." 𝗫𝗠 smiled and sat at his desk. "Close the door on your way out. ________." He walked in at the normal time, 8:25, hiding a smirk when he noticed the class quiet down after a few seconds. Not bad compared to the first day. "Class, yesterday someone got into campus. I know you all think nothing of it because nobody got hurt. But level 3 is very hard to breach. It means they got past our security systems." He took a deep breath when the class squirmed. "The person who broke in was not there to harm anyone. All they did was warn us of upcoming events. I planned for rescue training today, with me, All Might, and one more person." The class whispers quieted. "But their information changes things. They said villains might show up. We will proceed with the training, but there will be some safety measures in place, so we can ensure the safety of you all. This is not required. If you do not want to go for any reason, let me know. There will be no judgment against you." He straightened his back and looked across the room. "But let me get this very clear." He amplified his voice so they knew the gravity of their situation. "If you do not take this seriously, you could get hurt or die. This is not a game. You must listen to everything me or the other heroes say." He sighed when Yaoyorozu raised her hand. "Yaoyorozu, what do you need?" She had been elected class representative, but the deputy, Ida, kept ordering the class around, so she switched positions with him. "My parents might be hesitant about me going. What are you going to do about that?" She tilted her head to the side. "Although it isn't 100% certain that villains will come, I've contacted parents. Those without permission to go will not, and will stay here to work on a separate assignment the principal created. I'll let you know if you can't come." He pressed a button on the remote he was holding, triggering the students' hero costumes to pop out of the wall. "You can decide if you want to wear your costumes or not, because there are probably costumes that limit your abilities." The class lightened up when Aizawa mentioned that almost all of the staff members would be there as a backup just in case, and the police will be called as soon as the alarms go off. "The building is off campus, so we're taking a bus. That is all, get ready." The class was unusually quiet on the bus to the SJ, only a few whispers here and there. A couple students were left behind, Mina, Hagakure, and Ojiro. Their parents refused to allow them to go. There was a second bus on the way to them, holding backup forces. They were to stay in the bus until Tae, where certain villains were attacking. 13 greeted them in front of the doors, earning a few excited remarks about his appearance. "Everyone, I've been waiting for you. Let's go inside without delay." He motioned to the entrance, the class following when he began the way in. "Where's All Might? We were supposed to meet here." Aizawa wasn't surprised the man didn't arrive on time. "About that. He overexerted himself this morning. He's resting in the teacher's lounge." The space hero held up 3 fingers. "I'm glad we took extra precautions," 𝐕 mumbled. "All right, can't be helped. Shall we begin?" "Now, there are a couple of things I need to mention before we get started." 13 went on a short monologue about the safety and dangers of quirk usage, going through all of the disasters and rescue situations at the unforeseen simulation joint. "That is all. Thank you for listening." He finished and bowed at the class, prompting claps from them. "All right then, first," Aizawa quieted when the power in their building shut off. A small cloud of purple mist appeared in the center of the SJ, swirling and expanding until yellow glowing eyes appeared. A hand penetrated the wall of smoke, creating an opening. The hand's owner stuck his head through the hole, showing his locks of blue hair. The man's face was blocked by a severed hand, only showing a single red eye. "Don't move," Eraserhead shouted as Kirishima took a step forward, pulling on his goggles. "Those are villains." As the man stepped entirely into the building, they saw his full figure, more hands covering various body parts. When his second foot met the ground, dozens of villains came pouring through the mist. "The teacher's schedule, we have said that All Might was also supposed to be here." A voice emitted from the purple smoke, causing the students to shudder. After a couple of steps into the SJ, he stopped and looked toward the smoke. Aizawa's eyes widened when he saw who stepped out behind him, a kid in a gray hoodie, sporting a black face mask. A monster walked in with him. The kid's eyes furrowed as he stopped beside the blue-headed man. He pinched the bridge of his nose and said something unintelligible to the man, who stayed staring at the heroes in training. "Where is he?" the man said, clenching his fists. "I went through the trouble of bringing this while crowd, too." The most shrank to a smaller form located behind the 3. "All Might. I can't believe he's not here." He lifted his arms and looked at the ceiling. "I wonder if he'll come if we kill some kids. Dear Yua High School, I have written several letters. One is in case nothing happens, no us attack. Another is if the League attacked and you listen to me. If they attack a different area, and such. This letter means I was correct, but you didn't listen. I expect this to be the one I leave behind. I'm not sure what information I should give and what I shouldn't, so I'm sorry if this isn't helpful to you. The monster that came with us is called a Namu. It has multiple quirks. Remember how I said people were getting kidnapped for experiments? That is the outcome. They've been giving people multiple quirks until they become a puppet to use for their plans. Dozens over dozens of people have died, but the League finally figured out how to create the perfect weapon. I've tried talking to the Nomus to help them remember their lives, but I've had no luck. The only difference I've seen is that they appear to take a liking to me. I've read them books, shown them how to draw, sung the alphabet, nursery rhymes, and almost anything I could think of. I thought reminding them of things they did before coming here would help. So I started with things one might do with toddlers. I thought maybe I could move to more complex means when I see some positive progress. But I've barely had any reaction to my tactics. One of them, the one we brought to the 𝐬𝐽, recently started making more comprehensible sounds, and I've been hearing it speak more often. I was reading Love You Forever, and heard it mutter some sounds resembling love you. It is working very hard. I heard it repeating 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐫, and trying its best to say my name correctly. I've worked with it the most. It's the oldest successful Namu. It responds to the name Hyoko. I have a feeling it won't win the fight with all might, so if you win against it, please don't kill it. It is smart and kind. It isn't its fault they tortured it into obeying. The man with blue hair's quirk is decay. He needs to touch something with all 5 fingers to decay it. That's the only information I can give without compromising my position. I probably said too much about the 𝗵𝗲, but I suppose there are a couple of ways that could have made you able to find out that information by yourself. I request you don't instantly tell all of Japan about this knowledge. You should find the snitch they placed in the Musutafu police station before they blow my cover once more. Before I sign off, about the not listening thing you heroes seem to love, I wish you would cease that. It is not easy to sneak out of a villain base, you know? The villains are watching me constantly because of my last screw-up. I currently have lots of hoops to jump through. My efforts seem to be worth nothing to you, and I'm not surprised, but it's still frustrating. Sincerely, Kageno Tamura grinned as he walked up to Izuku, who was sitting alone in a booth at the bar. Sensei agreed that Izuku should be able to join them at the unforeseen simulation joint. After all, he should be there when his father's nemesis is killed, shouldn't he? Izuku, Tamura cheered. Yeah, he looked up from the book he was reading, meeting Tamura's eyes. The man was wearing his family's hands minus the one on his face. Get dressed, and then grab the Namu. We're gonna go kill All Might. He grinned wider and placed his father's hand to cover his face. Oh, he works at UA now, doesn't he? Are we going there? He closed his book and stood up. Yeah, Izuku nodded when Tamura gave the affirmative. All right, he smiled. I'll get ready. Be quick. Tamura waved Izuku out of the bar. When he left Tamura's field of vision, Izuku's smile dropped. He knew that Hyoko couldn't beat All Might. He wasn't strong enough. Tamura hardly thought things through before doing them, so they wouldn't have a good plan of action other than kill All Might. He closed the door to his room, changing from his casual clothes into his accustomed hoodie and mask. It's what he always wore when going outside. After changing, he made his way to the gray room, which is where they have been leaving Hyoko during times they didn't need it. Kurogiri didn't want to keep going to and from the laboratory, so they just kept it with them. Izuku tried to get it out of the room as much as possible, so he could stimulate Hyoko's brain more. But Tamura said, it's just an NPC and it doesn't matter, so there were rarely any chances. He opened the door and sadly smiled when he saw Hyoko sitting in the same place Izuku left it. Come on, we're gonna go now, okay? Izuku walked over and helped it stand up. You're going to have to fight All Might, but I want you to know all you have to do is try your best, he said, leading Hyoko out of the room. Maybe the Namu didn't understand much, but he wanted it to have a method of support. God knows they both need it. 𝐒𝐩𝐽, it said, Izuku's eyes widening. That's such a good job, he whispered, reaching up and stroking Hyoko's beak. Kageno, it squawked louder, seemingly proud of itself. You're doing amazing, Hyoko. He hugged the Namu, trying to stop his eyes from watering. It was making so much progress and Izuku was going to miss their interactions. The hell? Tamura walked into the hallway they were in. Come on, he groaned. Sorry, Izuku said, wiping his eyes and following Tamura. They walked into the bar, seeing dozens of thugs standing around, showing their various quirks to each other. Listen up. Tamura raised his scratchy voice to get the attention of the criminals. This is Kageno. You will listen to anything either of us tells you, or you will die, got it? He said. Kageno nodded in acknowledgement when his eyes met those of the crowd. They said various confirmations, bobbing their heads. Okay, let's get going then, Tamura grinned. Kurogiri started up his warp gate, the smoke pooling around the bar and creating a wall. Tamura was the first to step through, everyone following. When Izuku was the last in the bar, he ran his fingers through his hair. He pulled up his hood and nodded for Hiyoko to follow before walking through. He stopped next to Tamura, groaning when he saw students watching him. "What do you want me to do?" he said, pinching the bridge of his nose. He watched Kurogiri slowly reappear behind the hero group. "Kurogiri's gonna scatter the kids. You take care of the Namu. Other than that, I don't care what you do," he said, stepping forward and mentioning killing kids to Eraserhead. Izuku wasn't paying attention, keeping his gaze stuck on one of the students, who ran to attack Kurogiri along with a pointy red head. He watched as the mist man created a swirling purple dome around the kids, dispersing them throughout the building. He noticed Eraserhead's eyes flickering to him every so often as he threw himself at the center of the crowd and fought the villain. Tamura ran toward the hero and decayed his elbow. Izuku knew he couldn't stop him when the villain quietly ordered Hiyoko to sneak up on Eraser. So Kageno turned his attention to the group of students Kurogiri overlooked. He teleported himself to the entrance and watched the fight between Kurogiri and 13 from behind them all. The space hero was sucking in the warp gate, but Kurogiri created a portal behind 13 and redirected his quirk. The hero turned himself into dust and fell to the ground, students watching in fear. Izuku knew there wasn't enough harm done for him to be put out of commission forever, but Tamura would prefer the hero dead. A student, whose costume was suspiciously close to Ingenium's, raced toward the exit using engines in his legs. Kurogiri went after him, spouting insults, but a girl touched his neck plate and made him float. Izuku smiled at the warp's frustration. It wasn't like him to be so upset. He went after the student again, but a kid in front of Izuku used his quirk to send him flying to the central plaza. The Ingenium kid got out. Izuku looked behind him to see Tamura harshly scratching his neck when he heard 13 speak. "There's a villain behind you. Watch out." The hero shouted from his spot on the ground. The students turned to face him and stood in defensive stances. "I'm not going to do anything," Izuku said in an attempt to reassure the students. "The heroes are coming." The girl who made Kurogiri float shouted. "I'm not surprised," he said, turning to the central plaza. He saw Tamura rushing toward some of the students and instinctively teleported himself to them. Shigaraki gripped the green-headed girl's face, quirk deactivated. Izuku glanced back and saw Eraserhead's bloody face lifted to save his student. He sighed in relief. "We need to go." He pulled Tamura's hand off of the girl's face. "What are you doing?" he growled. Izuku opened his mouth to respond when All Might burst through the door. Tamura ripped his arm out of Izuku's grasp, turning to the hero. "I've been waiting. You trash of society," he mumbled. All Might's trademark smile was missing, and he jumped down to punch Tamura. He turned to do the same to Izuku, but Hiyoko took the blow, fighting back against the symbol of peace. Tamura was distracted by multiple heroes breaking through the building walls, so Izuku took that time to help Eraserhead. He teleported over to his favorite hero, flipping him over on his back to see the damage. The man's face was split open. He was motionless and his eyes were foggy. "Eraserhead, your students are coming to help you. You've got to stay awake," he spoke fast, checking the man's pulse. "Follow my finger," he said, moving it left and right to see how quickly the hero's eyes moved. Izuku took a deep breath when Aizawa's eyes refocused and met his. "Cage? No," he coughed, jaw slack. Yeah, don't talk. You've got a concussion, obviously, he mumbled, pulling the letter from his pocket and slipping it into Eraser's. "Get away from Mr. Aizawa, villain." The redhead that attacked Kurogiri was standing over them with the skin on his arms hardened like rock. "Okay." Izuku stood up and took a step back in case the student planned on punching him. "I don't think you should move him until paramedics get here. There could be Who are you to tell me about how to take care of my teacher?" The student stepped over Eraser to block him from Kageno. "Good luck nursing your hero complex when he dies." Then, he scowled from under his mask. "So unmanly," he growled, standing up more straight and preparing to fight Izuku. Kid." The man tried sitting up, eyes glossing over again. "Stop talking, I just told you not to. And while you're at it, stop trying to move, it's dangerous." He hissed and gently pushed Eraser to his back, looking up to see Shigaraki getting shot by snipe. "Tamura." Izuku teleported over to him, catching his bloodied form. He mentally cursed himself for not paying attention. He saw Hiyoko being punched through the ceiling of the 𝐎𝐳 before he and Tamura were eaten by Kurogiri's warp. Eraserhead's first instinct when seeing the villains was to protect his students, and he did just that. He rushed forward to the central plaza, taking down every thug he saw. He tried keeping his eye on Kageno through his peripherals, but the villains were attempting to overpower him in numbers. He only had the chance to check on the kid for a second after clobbering a criminal or two. Kageno was attentively watching Eraserhead fight alongside the bird monster and man with pale blue hair. Aizawa took down a thug that was trying to slink away when he heard the handyman talk. "You're so cool, Eraserhead, so cool," he mumbled, running forward. "The final boss." Eraser threw a villain to the ground and said. He ducked the man's punch and stuck his elbow out to land a jab. Eraser's arm was caught by the man, who grabbed his arm and pressed the pads of his fingers against the hero's sleeve. Eraserhead watched as the sleeve corroded and the man's quirk spread to his skin and muscle. He grunted and pushed the man away, huffing in pain and holding his arm. He glanced at where Kageno was and tensed when the kid wasn't there. "By the way, Eraserhead, I'm not the final boss." The man grinned and pointed to something behind Aizawa. As he looked behind him, his decayed arm was harshly grabbed by the bird monster. It shoved Eraser to the ground and crushed his skull against the ground, sending his goggles flying. It grabbed his decayed arm and snapped it in half. "It's the anti-symbol of peace, the bioengineered Namu." The man wore a grin and proudly named the monster. The creature, now known as a Namu, let out an ear-piercing screech. His arm was grasped tighter and broken again, generating a pained outcry from Eraser. He heard the blue-headed man proudly insult his quirk. In a fit of anger, Aizawa raised his head to make eye contact with the man and activated his quirk. The creature slammed its hand down to crush Eraser's arm beneath the pressure. "It's like he's breaking a twig," Aizawa gasped in pain. "I'm sure I erased his quirk. That means he is just that strong." He struggled to keep his head on the ground when the Namu grabbed it, the creature eventually triumphing. It rammed his head down hard enough to create a crater in the stone beneath them. Eraserhead felt his breathing hitch when he heard his students whispering nearby. He heard the man rush towards them and used all his strength to lift his head, cancel the man's quirk, and save his students. As his head was slammed against the ground once more, he felt himself slipping into unconsciousness. His head felt fuzzy, and all he could hear was the ringing in his ears. Blood was pooling beneath his face, and his eyes could only see black. He woke up on his back, seeing Kageno crouching over him. "Stu coming to help you stay awake." He tried to listen past the muffled sound and looked behind his distorted vision. "Follow my finger with your eyes," the kid said. "Kageno," he tried to say, warm red liquid pooling down his face. The kid winced and began to speak again. "Yeah, don't talk. You've got a concussion, obviously." Although the light hurt his eyes, Aizawa kept them open to watch what Kageno was doing. The kid pulled out a letter as Eraser saw one of his students walking up to them. His head felt like it was filled with cotton and his ears were buzzing. The two kids supposedly argued, Kirishima looking protective and worried while Kageno looked frustrated and disappointed. His vision was darkening, but he panicked when Kageno stepped back. Kid," he moved his head to face Kageno, trying to sit up. Kageno softly laid him back down, saying something about danger. Eraserhead couldn't hear beyond the numbness in his body, but he saw the two's faces twist into annoyance. He heard muffled arguing as he decided it best to give in to his tiredness and sleep. Aizawa woke up to find fabric covering his face. He panicked before remembering his face was caved in the last time he was awake, and he would need bandages. His vision was obscured, but he could see through enough to find his way around. He ran his fingers across his various facial features, his hand being stopped by another's. "Rest your arms, Shu. They were broken, remember?" He heard the familiar voice of Hisashi speak, calming his senses slightly. "Hisashi," he coughed, his throat dry. "Can I get some water?" He looked over and saw his best friend sitting next to him, wearing casual clothes and having his hair in a messy bun. "Yeah, of course," he said, grabbing the cup Aizawa didn't notice was on the table next to them. Aizawa sat up, adjusted the fabric on his face so that his mouth was free, taking the water and swiftly drinking it. Thank you. He set the cup down. Are my students okay? Thankfully, yes. Yamada smiled softly. There weren't any serious injuries other than yours. I think they're worried, though. He leaned forward to talk to Aizawa. Kageno left a note in my pocket. 𝗧𝗪𝗧 saw his hero costume was replaced with a medical gown. Where is it? He looked around, wincing when his headache banged against his temples. Right. He pushed his glasses up to sit on the bridge of his nose. We found it. But you shouldn't go back into work yet. It might be harder for you to use your quirk now over long periods, he said, tracing his knuckles with his thumb. I'm sorry, I feel like I messed up. His voice broke slightly, tears escaping from his eyes. What are you talking about? 𝗧𝗪𝗧 turned to face his friend completely, concern present on his face. I was right outside the door. Shoo. I could have helped. You could have. He cut himself off with a quiet sob. You could have died, and I wasn't there. Hey now, that was not your fault. Aizawa gripped Yamada's hand in reassurance. The villains had a quirk that blocked our signals. There's no way you could have known. He wiped the tears from Asashi's face. He started fretting again, but was interrupted by 𝗧𝗪𝗧. Stop that. You did nothing wrong, he interrupted. Now, I know I scared you, and I'm sorry. But I had to protect my students. You can't do that, 𝗧𝗪𝗧. I don't want to lose my best friend again. Hisashi sniffled and dropped eye contact. I'm okay though, right? Yes, but you could have had permanent damage. You're lucky your brain's fine. Hisashi lightly flicked 𝗧𝗪𝗧's forehead. If I promise I won't go back to work immediately, can I see the note? 𝗧𝗪𝗧 changed the subject and let go of Hisashi's hand. If I show you, will you get some rest? He raised his eyebrow in query. Maybe, he mumbled. Okay, fine. He let out a wet laugh and sighed. I'll grab it. He briskly left the room and came back with a photocopy of the letter. I've read it as well. Aizawa sighed at Kageno's hints. The kid was obviously not happy with helping the League of Villains, and he didn't trust the heroes. The Musutafu police station also had an undercover villain in its midst. 𝗧𝗪𝗧 bit the inside of his cheek and sucked in a deep breath, thinking of how to move forward. Hiyoko, he said to his friend. Do we have it? The bird monster thing? Hisashi asked. Well, I think it's being held by some scientists for testing. But you can probably see it or something when you're on duty. Did anybody else read this? He held up the paper and motioned to it. Nedzu, Tsukachi, All Might. And I think Nimiri have. Obviously a couple more officers in the station. But Tsukachi thought it should be need to know only. The blonde smiled as 𝗧𝗪𝗧 nodded in relief. They're looking into the traitor, I'm guessing. Yes, right. I was going to tell you about that. But you've already done a lot today, yeah? He raised his eyebrows. You should get some rest. I will soon. He looked to his bedside table and picked up a pen that sat along with some papers Hisashi must have been grading. He underlined parts of the letter he thought were vital. No, Yamada scolded. Rest now. You lost almost 2 liters of blood. He snatched the pen out of 𝗧𝗪𝗧's hand and placed it back where it was before. I'm fine now. 𝗧𝗪𝗧 scowled and went to grab the pen once more, pulling his hand away when it was smacked by Hisashi. No, you're not. Hisashi gathered up the pens and put them in his bag. You're staying in the hospital for a few days, then you can work. You have a whole life of working ahead of you, got it? Got, fine, he groaned and let Hisashi push him down to lay. Can you tell me how the Namu is doing when I wake up? Yeah, sure, the blonde smiled. Just rest. 𝗧𝗪𝗧 nodded before closing his eyes and falling asleep to the soft humming of Yamada singing songs to himself. Dear Mother, I haven't written one of these letters in a while, I'm sorry. I hope the ones I did write got to you wherever you are. My villain name is officially Kageno now. I did the thing I told you about, sending letters to the police, remember? They should be with the cops by now if everything went as planned, but I'm not sure if they're reaching them if you know what I mean. Maybe heroes and police officers are stupid because they haven't done anything I told them to. Well, I haven't directly told them to do anything, but they should be able to figure it out. I'm turning 14 in almost 2 months, but I also want to celebrate your birthday in some way. After all, it's a big one. Age 40 is something to commemorate, right? I'm sorry I haven't written in a while. I've been kind of busy with All for One and Tamira. They barely took any time to find out I was contacting the heroes, so they've been observing me or whatever, and I haven't been able to get any free time. There's nothing much news to share, But remember how I mentioned Tamira's new project last time, the 𝗨𝗲. The doctor made a lot of progress and figured out how to make 𝗨𝗲s so that they are perfect for what Tamu wants. The letters I mentioned earlier brought 𝗧𝗧𝗏 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 erasure to our neighborhood, and we had to move again. Now we live at this bar underground. Tamira brought Anamu and me to the 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐽𝐽 High School. We were there to kill All Might. We failed, thank God, but it seems like we got pretty close. I'm worried about Tamu's temper. He seems angry lately, and he tried to kill a student at 𝐬𝐽 last week. 𝗧𝗏𝗏 stopped him, but got seriously injured. Maybe if you were still here, your nursing skills could help me figure out if he's okay. I hope so. I got an injury a month ago that hasn't healed very well, and I wish you could help. It's a laceration that sits diagonally on my wrist. I got it when I was carving wood. I was cutting toward myself and nicked it. I'm sorry, I promised I wouldn't do that, but I keep forgetting. Bye, it hasn't healed well. I'm referring to how it's becoming infected. I asked Tamura for bandages, and he said, quote, if you want to do dumb shit, fix it yourself. Get your own bandages or get none. I then went to Kurogiri, who responded with, if Shigaraki Tamura denies you the dressing you ask for, I will as well. I haven't been able to go anywhere, so I've had to use a clean strip of cloth I cut off of my pillowcase. It's not sterile or disinfected by any means. This letter has dragged on a bit longer than I intended, so I think I'll end it here. Rest in peace, Mom. Sincerely, Kageno Izuku held on tightly to Tamura and looked at the man's wounds. He had a few shots scattered across his arms and legs, but nowhere fatal, thankfully. He was glad Snipe knew what he was doing. Those bastards, they don't care about hurting people if it's to save someone else, Tamura growled, sitting up but wincing in pain. Please let go, young master. I will bring Shigaraki Tamura to the doctor. Kurogiri helped the blue-headed man through a portal he made before turning to Izuku. Please turn your attention to the monitor. The master would like to have a word with you. Izuku nodded and the man left. The boy stood up and wiped the blood off his hands and onto his jeans, walking to the bar to stand in front of the TV. Hello, sir, he nodded to the camera. Izuku, all for one said, sounding irate. I would like to know why you thought it was a good idea to help 𝗧𝗏𝗏 and his students. Izuku took in a quick breath and spoke. I thought, Mom, maybe you wouldn't want 𝐻IM to die because you told me. You told me you wanted his Q quirk, he answered, biting his lip and cursing himself for stuttering again. His speech disorder had become less severe as he grew, but anxiety made it hard to form sentences without stammering. Yes, all for one hummed. I did tell you that. He could practically hear the man's small smile. But I do believe I also told you to act as Tamura's player too, did I not? Yes, you told me to keep him from getting too angry, he murmured loud enough for the microphone to pick up his words. So I did. And I do believe player twos are supposed to protect their main players, the man sighed. Of course, I'm sorry. He dug his nails into his forearm, upset that Tamura got hurt. I wasn't paying attention. But I didn't think the heroes would get there that fast, he lied. You didn't, did you? Well, I saw you weren't in your room out last week. Tell me about that. Izuku knew his father had all the information he needed. He wanted to see if Izuku would tell the truth or not. I wanted fresh air, Izuku grit his teeth. He was frustrated about Tamura and the Musutafu Station's traitor. It's not like heroes did anything anyway, he mumbled. I thought you got all that rebellious behavior out of your system. I don't like punishing you, liar, Izuku thought, staring at his red shoes. Get some rest, little Rose. I'll ask Kurogiri and Tamura some questions. Then we can talk. All for one ordered, making Izuku take in a deep breath. Yes, sir. Thank you. He nodded and left for his bedroom. He collapsed on his bed and facepalmed, hoping Hiyoko and Tamura were okay. If they hurt Hiyoko, he decided, I'll kill them. He decided to follow his father's instructions and tried to sleep. Izuku laid on his bed, going through the events of his day to think about what he could have done better. He then remembered the eyes he saw earlier, sitting under spiky blonde hair. The kid's hero costume was similar to the draft his childhood best friend created. Izuku ran his fingers through his hair, biting his lip. He thought Bakugo Katsuki was dead. When All for One first took in Izuku, he told the boy he killed the Bakugo family. He had nobody else to believe after being shown their dead bodies. He scowled at the memory, laying down and hugging one of his pillows. He squeezed his eyes shut, going through statistics and hero facts in his head to distract himself. Eraserhead, Present Mike, and Midnight were in the same graduating class and 𝐒𝐴𝐵 has 65 sidekicks. Izuku mumbled to himself until he fell asleep. Izuku was running, panting, sweating, and keeping down whimpers. "Ah, don't cry," he heard the man coo from behind him. Izuku didn't turn to face him. He kept on turning corners right, left, right. Fuck. He made a wrong turn. He didn't bother keeping sobs and tears down as he saw an all too familiar grin blocking his path. Dead End Izuku woke up drenched in a cold sweat. He blinked away tears that were clouding his vision, sitting up. He sat up and raised his hands to his face to shakily cup his cheeks. Nightmares weren't entirely uncommon for Izuku, so he was proficient at calming techniques. He took a lion's breath, as his mom called it, and got up out of bed. He glanced at his left wrist, wincing at the infection's development. It was swollen and red with pus, a clear sign of bacteria contamination. Walking to his bathroom, he turned on hot water and dispensed himself a palmful of soap. As he scrubbed the cut clean, he thought about his dream. "I haven't had one about my childhood in a while," he thought, scoffing. He grabbed a clean hand towel and dabbed the water off. His mother taught him to not dry a cut roughly, but to do it softly and slowly. He bit his tongue at the idea of his mother and sat at his desk. Due to his mind drifting to thoughts of his mother, he realized he hadn't written a letter to her in a while. He picked up a pencil and notebook to ponder what to write about. It was April 9th, and 𝐭𝐸's 10th death anniversary would be on September 17th, 161 days. He had time to prepare a memorial and possibly visit her grave. He would tell her about his plans later, he thought. He should write about what's going on for him currently. He started writing down everything that came to his mind, from his villain name to the cut on his arm. When he was done, his gut told him to, so he signed as Kageno. He ripped the paper out of his notebook and grabbed a shoebox under his bed. The shoebox held all of the letters he had written to his mother years before. There were at least 100. He used to write one every month or when he missed her, which was a lot. He decided against putting his newest note into the shoebox, pushing it back under the bed, and standing up, he folded the note and slipped it into the pocket of his jeans, going to leave his room. Izuku looked up at the clock above the doorway and saw it was 6 p.m. He groaned and thought, "I slept for over a day again," before walking into the bar. Tamura was sitting on a bar stool, wearing his usual black outfit. Kurogiri was behind the counter, compulsively cleaning it. "Izu, I got healed by the doctor," he exclaimed, standing up before Kurogiri motioned for him to sit again. "His arms are healing less quickly, but his legs are fine," Kurogiri informed him. "That's great," he said, smiling. "Ah, but that means you can't play games as much." He sat down next to Tamura. "Why not?" the man whined. "Because you have to rest your arms so they can heal," answered Izuku. "That's bull," he grumbled, propping his head up against his palms. "What would you two like for dinner?" Kurogiri hovered, waiting for instructions. "Gyoza," Tamura responded quickly. For dinner? He was expecting the man to ask for okonomiyaki like he usually did. But then again, he didn't eat dinner with him often. "Yeah," Tamura scoffed. "If you don't like it, then go back to your room. Whatever you want. I'm not very hungry anyway." He smiled and started to go back to his room before remembering what he came out for. "I need bandages," Izuku stated to Kurogiri. "I told you no." Tamura poked Izuku's shoulder, turning the teen's attention to him. "Well, it's getting infected." He showed Tamura his laceration. "But if you want me to be an amputee, then that's fine." He shrugged and started to leave again. "Ugh, stop being a baby," he said, grabbing Izuku's hood to stop him from leaving. "Kurogiri, give him what he needs," he added. "Of course." Shigaraki Tamura. Kurogiri picked up a first aid box and allowed Izuku to dig through it to get what he needed. After grabbing a roll of gauze, tape, and cream for his infection, Kurogiri put the box away. "Thank you." He swiftly went to his bathroom to rewash and dress his cut. After he was content with the wrap, he walked back out to ask Tamura a question. "What's in those?" Tamura asked, leaning over the counter and watching 𝐎𝐸𝐲𝐽 make his gyoza. Pork, your favorite, he continued, mincing the cabbage. Mushrooms. Tamura slouched back down and peeled at the paint on the counter. No, the young master prefers them mushroom-free. The mist man pinched the dumplings shut, putting them on the stove. Thanks, 𝐎𝐸𝐲𝐽, Izuku smiled, sitting down again. He knew All for One had ordered the man to adhere to Izuku's food preferences, but it was still nice to think he cared. I thought you were going back to sleep, Tamura groaned. I wanted to ask you a question, Tamu. He leaned against the bar, taking the hot green tea 𝐎𝐸𝐲𝐽 just poured him. Eat dinner first, the 𝗲𝗃𝗀𝗃 said, plating 6 gyoza for each of them. Thank you for the meal. Izuku gratefully took the chopsticks Tamura handed to him and ate a dumpling. So, Izuku, Tamura said, muffled through a mouthful of gyoza. What's your question? Don't talk with your mouth full, Izuku scolded, taking a sip of tea. But, regarding the question, I kinda wanted to ask you alone. Why? 𝐎𝐸𝐲𝐽 ain't gonna do anything, he rolled his eyes. It's just a little personal, and no offense. He glanced at the mist man and set his chopsticks down. But 𝐎𝐸𝐲𝐽 has to report everything to my, father. All right, I guess, he scoffed, finishing his plate. We can talk in your room or something. Thank you. Izuku saw Tamura eyeing his leftover dumplings and passed them to the man, already satisfied after eating 4. We'll talk in your room or something then, okay? Tamura said before finishing the food that was given to him. Izuku nodded and departed to his room. Izuku sat on his bed and tapped his foot, thinking about how he should go about talking to Tamura. Should he be assertive? Should he act like he does when Tamura is upset? Should he be passive? His pondering was interrupted by Tamura walking into his room. Yo, Izu, he nodded in greeting and leaned against the wall. Hi, Izuku stood up, fidgeting in place. Why are you acting weird? Tamura scoffed. Just ask your question. You're all right, I'll just get on with it, he sighed, his stomach in knots. I was just wondering if IC could go somewhere today, he gulped, keeping his eyes locked on the ground. Where? I'll go with you, he asked. I wanted T to go to my Izuku gulped. My mother's grave? He glanced up and saw Tamura glaring at him. Are you stupid? Tamura stepped closer and tried to make eye contact with Izuku. Well, I thought. He was interrupted by the man in front of him. Look at me while you're talking, he growled. I'm sorry. Izuku's head shot up to meet the eyes of Tamura. I just thought I could give her this goodbye note. He pulled the note out of his pocket, holding it far enough away so Tamura couldn't grab it easily. You are stupid. I would never let you go there, he said as Izuku put away the letter. Even just to leave something. I haven't talked about her in years. Please, he pleaded. Just to say goodbye for good, please, Tamu? Stop. My final answer is no. I'm not changing my mind. Tamura stepped back and began to walk to the door. Why? Izuku watched as Tamura gritted his teeth and turned around once more. What do you mean why? He scowled. Sensei killed that bitch for a reason, you know. You're never gonna go near her again, so just shut up and do what we say. Tamura placed his hand on Izuku's shoulder, grinning at Izuku's frustrated expression. Okay, Izuku smiled back coldly, grabbing Tamura's arm. He cared for Tamura, but he loved his mother. He twisted the man around so Izuku's back was toward the door and Tamura was further inside the room. What are you? Before Tamura finished his sentence, Izuku activated one of his quirks, Shard. He pushed Tamura against the wall with a crystal panel. It was pale green and transparent, strong despite its appearance of glass. Izuku, I'm gonna kill you, he said, trying to decay the barrier, breaking it only for it to reappear. Yeah, Izuku said, taking a deep breath and preparing to use 2 quirks at once. 𝐎𝐸𝐲𝐽, help, he yelled, the mist man appearing in a few seconds. Izuku held the crystal as he glanced at the door, teleporting to the hallway. Young master, I would advise you to set Shigaraki Tamura free. 𝐎𝐸𝐲𝐽 prepared a portal behind Izuku to trap him, startled when he heard an outcry from Tamura. Izuku was slightly compressing the crystal, making Tamura feel more trapped. He didn't want to hurt the man, but he couldn't turn back now. He took a step back into the hallway, quickly teleporting as far away from the men as he could. His barrier fell. Tamura immediately ran out into the hallway and went after Izuku. The teen traveled to the door of the bar, opened it, ran outside, and slammed it shut behind him. He took a deep breath and teleported to the first roof he saw, running and hopping across them. He didn't risk looking behind him, hearing Tamura's calls from the ground. A warp gate appeared in front of him, making his steps falter. Izuku cursed and transferred himself to the furthest roof he could see on the horizon, continuing that pattern until he was sure he lost Kurogiri and Tamura. When the sun set completely, he found himself in a town he didn't entirely recognize, not that he got out much. Anyway, Izuku jumped down to the ground, walking to a more public area. He recognized Hawk's agency and realized he was in Fukuoka, surprising himself. He didn't register how far he went. Izuku thought he might still be in Musutafu. He pulled up his hood and blended into the crowd, taking a walk to try and think things through. Izuku cursed himself for not coming up with a plan earlier. He had no idea where his mother's grave was, so he couldn't go there even if Tamura said yes. He took the letter out of his pocket and walked into the nearest alley he saw. All he could do was wait for his father to find him. He leaned against the wall next to a dumpster and threw the letter away. He buried his face in his hands and sat down on the ground. "What did you just throw away?" Izuku looked up to see who spoke, seeing Eraserhead standing before him, face covered in bandages. "None of your business." He stood up and moved into a fighting stance, noticing the hero's arms were bound in casts. "Calm down, kid," Eraser sighed and sat down next to Izuku. "Wanna talk?" Izuku was skeptical, but sat down where he was before. "Why?" He glowered at the hero. "You seem troubled," he spoke, treating Izuku as if he was a stray cat. "You're healing okay?" Izuku asked, ignoring the hero's statement. "Yes, I was lucky paramedics got there so fast. We asked them to be prepared." Izuku nodded at the answer. "We were all lucky you were there, you know?" Eraser looked at Izuku, watching his expression of distrust. "What are you talking about?" he scoffed. "That villain that was with you would have hurt one of my students if you hadn't stopped him," Eraser said. I guess," Izuku fidgeted with his sleeve, keeping his eyes locked on his shoes. "Hey, Kageno," Eraser took a deep breath, seemingly preparing for a difficult talk. "You know, you can tell us if you're in some kind of trouble. Us being police officers, heroes. What are you?" Izuku's wariness came back full force. If he learned anything from his father, it was that he shouldn't trust law enforcement. They always have ulterior motives. "Did I say something wrong?" The hero's eyebrows furrowed beneath his bandages. No," he stood up, backing away from Eraser. "Shit, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you." Eraserhead stood up as well, sheepishly rubbing the back of his neck. Poorly, since he had casts. "I'm not good at this." It's not that, it's just, I have to go." Izuku turned around and booked it, ignoring Eraserhead's apologies behind him. He stopped and rested for a bit after running for a few minutes. He caught his breath and realized he left his letter there with Eraserhead, mentally facepalming. He began walking again, this time aimlessly. "Young master," he heard echo behind him. He whipped his head around to see Kurogiri standing there, a portal behind him. Before he missed man could say anything else, Izuku teleported to another pathway that was next to him. Izuku ran as fast as he could, but he knew the mist man had an advantage. When Izuku tripped over a pile of trash, Kurogiri took that opportunity to make a portal in front of the team. He fell to his knees in front of All for One. "Hello again, my little rose," the man grinned. He was screwed. Aizawa was off work for a week, and he had nothing to do at home, so he decided a little walk wouldn't hurt. 𝗧𝗪𝗏 had, in recent months, been living in a 2-bedroom apartment with Hisashi. Though he had an attraction to the man, it was most convenient for them to live together. They had similar schedules during the school year, so they only needed one car. Aizawa couldn't stand living with a man he was in love with him only being a friend and all, so he confessed. After they got from the hospital, 𝗧𝗪𝗏 told Hisashi that they couldn't be roommates anymore due to his crush. Much to 𝗧𝗪𝗏's surprise, his feelings were reciprocated. They both decided taking things slow was a good idea. But one day, 𝗧𝗪𝗏 woke up to his roommate cuddling him. Hisashi had a nightmare, woke 𝗧𝗪𝗏 up like usual, and the coal-haired man pulled the blonde into bed with him. There were no objections to Hisashi's proposal that sharing a bed wouldn't be too unpleasant. ________𝗧𝗪𝗏 was on the way home from his walk when he saw the green-headed kid. He saw Kageno throw a paper in the trash and slide to the ground. hiding his face with his palms. Aizawa quickly recognized the all-familiar hair and hoodie. After all, he had been working on the kid's case for months. He thought about the letter and decided it might be a good idea to check up on him. He hoped the kid trusted him enough to open up a bit. "I thought they weren't letting him outside," he questioned. "What did you just throw away?" Aizawa walked closer, frustrated at his limited vision. "None of your business." Kageno stood up and positioned his arms so he was prepared to fight. "Calm down, kid." 𝐲𝐸 thought a peaceful tactic could work. "Wanna talk?" He looked closer at the kid's face. Now he was without a mask, close and in person, so it was more clear to see. He had a faint scar trailing from his neck to his jaw, up to the middle of his cheek. "Why?" He seemed suspicious of Aizawa, cautiously sitting down. "You seem troubled," 𝐲𝐸 insinuated a question. "You're healing okay?" Kageno disregarded 𝐲𝐸's concern, or plainly didn't believe it. "Yes, I was lucky paramedics got there so fast. We asked them to be prepared." The kid bobbed his head, playing with the sleeve of his hoodie. "We were all lucky you were there, you know?" "What are you talking about?" he scorned. "That villain that was with you would have hurt one of my students if you hadn't stopped him." He briefly saw Kageno adopt a small smile that the kid didn't seem to notice. I guess." He avoided eye contact and sighed. "Hey, Kageno," 𝐲𝐸 figured then was the best time to try and reassure the kid. "You know, you can tell us if you're in some kind of trouble. Us being police officers, heroes. What are you?" 𝐲𝐸 saw as Kageno's eyes flicked to his, irises filling with incredulity. "Did I say something wrong?" He cursed himself for speaking thoughtlessly. No." Kageno stood up and inched away. "Shit, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you," 𝐲𝐸 followed, upset that he might have ruined the small amount of trust he had with the kid. "I'm not good at this." It's not that. It's just, I have to go." Kageno ran faster than 𝐲𝐸 could with the casts. "Kageno, wait, I'm sorry," he yelled after the teen, reluctantly walking back to the dumpster bin when he lost sight. 𝐲𝐸 took his arms out of the splints to pick up the paper, successfully grabbing it after a minute or two of trying. He held it tightly on the walk back to his apartment, immediately heading to read it after entering. It was a note to Kageno's mother. His late mother, from the looks of it. 𝐲𝐸 looked for clues so he could find who the woman was. But the only information Kageno left was that she died and had nursing skills. He could work with that. _______Hisashi eagerly entered his apartment, proudly holding his present for 𝐲𝐸. He was hesitant to leave his boyfriend alone with 2 arm casts, but he had to go to work. He didn't want to wake up 𝐲𝐸, so he didn't say goodbye that morning. It had broken him up all day while teaching, so he decided getting a present should make up for it. He changed out of his hero costume before leaving UA, so that he wasn't recognized, and immediately went to shop. There weren't any cat mugs at the market, but he saw a vendor selling flowers on the way home. Of course, Hisashi bought all of the yellow ones. He had to get 𝐲𝐸's favorite color, but he just couldn't pick between the tulips, roses, sunflowers, daisies, and the marigolds, so he bought them all. He had a bulky bouquet of various yellow flowers, a present he thought 𝐲𝐸 would love. Hisashi walked in and saw his boyfriend on his laptop, typing with a pen he held in his arms. The man looked up and smiled when he saw the flowers. "Sorry I'm home so late, I got this for ya," Hisashi exclaimed, beaming. He held out the bunch of flowers to show 𝐲𝐸. "Beautiful," he stated in response, moving his arms to take the bouquet. "Stop using your arms," he scolded and brought the flowers closer to his body, swiftly grabbing an empty vase from their laundry room. "Here, tell me, what are you doing? I can help." Hisashi filled the glass with water and placed the flowers inside, putting the finished product in the center of the dining table. "Research. I know I'm supposed to be Ristin, but it's important," 𝐲𝐸 responded, turning the screen to show Hisashi. There was a search bar pulled up displaying "missing mother plus nurse plus news plus found dead." The blonde hummed, sitting down next to 𝐲𝐸 and scrolling down the page. "How about this?" He clicked a news article and read the contents. "Woman found murdered in apartment, child missing." "Yes, look at that one," 𝐲𝐸 said, watching over Hisashi's shoulder. "Looks like the kid was 5 when they went missing," he stated, looking at 𝐲𝐸's reaction. "Look into it. Did they find the kid?" Hisashi scrolled at the comments of the article. The names weren't released in the report. but some people commented about it. User 39bin372. Did they find the killer? LMK, cause I can't find their names. I'm thinking the dad probably did it cause he's not mentioned at all. User 18E434. Nah, kids probably dead too lol. Hubby def did it BTW user 39E372. True user 10E643. Names are Midoriya Izuku and Izuku. Bro's been missing like 7 years by now. They still ain't find the killer user 18434. Useless ass cops 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐵. Kids either dead or RLE fucked up lol user 98E422. Stop being so dumb. Mom might've been bad ek user 10E643. Mom seemed normal to me. If I were you, I would stop making up dumb theories and posting M. That's enough, 𝐲𝐸𝐽 said, sighing. That's not them. Who are you looking for? Hisashi asked, going back to the search bar. Kageno, he answered and handed the letter to Hisashi. I earlier texted Tsukachi. He's coming to make a copy today. Nezu has read it already. How'd you get this? Hisashi tilted his head in question. I saw the kid on the way home from my walk, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 explained in response. I see. How do you know that kid isn't Kageno? He read through the note, realizing why he was looking for dead or missing mothers. Cause when we first saw Kageno's full face, I looked for kids approximately his age, and that kid came up. I didn't bother looking at the picture because that Midoriya Izuku was quirkless. He spoke as if his answer was well-known information. Okay, shoo, but I kinda disagree with ya. Hisashi closed the laptop, turning to face his boyfriend. What do you mean? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looked tired. Well, I've had a few students who were thought quirkless. They were misdiagnosed or had dormant quirks. He smiled sweetly. There's also a medical mutation. Have you heard of TQS? Yeah, but I've never learned what it stands for, he shrugged. I heard of it when one of my students taught me. She had a TQ. It stands for trauma quirk. It's rare, but it happens. Hisashi was happy to help. What happened, Zashi? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asked, exasperated. Right, Hisashi chuckled nervously. Well, most times, a quirkless person with the TQ gene would be quirkless forever. It stays dormant in their body for their whole lives, he explained. The reason it's called the trauma quirk is because for the people that activate it always reported it happening due to an extremely traumatic experience. My kid's quirk came out after she had near-death experience. Hisashi looked solemn. It's hard for them, but it saves their lives. Sounds like it, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 nodded, taking in the information. Kageno had always seemed very wary. That can be a type of trauma response trust issues. I think you should look at the kid's file, at least. You might recognize him. Yeah, whatever. I'll tell Tsukachi to bring his file, I guess, he responded, rubbing his temples. I'm going to bed. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 stood up, walked to his room, and collapsed on the bed face first. Hisashi followed. Awa, look, Bean wants to lay with ya. The blonde pointed at the Russian blue cat that jumped onto the bed. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 grumbled something into his pillow. Sprout walking to lay on his back. The tired man sent a text to someone and went back to sleep. Hisashi turned off the light as he left the room, telling the shoe he could nap while he made dinner for them. He walked into the kitchen, their second cat, Coffee, meowing at his feet. Hisashi fed the cats gourmet food every day when he got home. Coffee was a Havana brown. They only had him for a few months, and he already took in 𝗧𝗵𝗲's personality. Yo, want some munchies? Hisashi picked the cat up, gave him a quick kiss, and put him back down before grabbing ingredients from the pantry. He had cooked a bunch of grilled chicken for the cats. He refused to feed them dry kibble. He would prepare food for them every day no matter what. He grabbed the cats' bowls, throwing in some chicken, pork, carrots, and tuna before setting them back down. Beanie, he yelled, slightly using his quirk. Dinner. The blue cat came running down the hallway as usual, running over to Coffee and sitting down next to him so they could share. Now, we gotta make Grumpy some dinner too, huh? Hisashi asked the cats, giggling when they both turned to him and turned back, eating in a way that made it look like Hisashi was starving them. He turned back and started making curry for himself and 𝗧𝗵𝗲. He made a little extra just in case Tsukachi came over and wanted some. _______, Hisashi yelled, making sure his boyfriend woke up. Change out of your hero clothes, dinner's ready. A few minutes later, the man walked into their living room with casual clothing on. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a dark blue crew neck sweater. "Hey, sleepyhead." Hisashi was stirring the curry as 𝗧𝗪𝗧 came around behind him. The man grunted in response, hugging Hisashi and leaning forward to kiss his cheek. "Detective Ʋchiai is coming over," he sighed. "Great. I made enough dinner for all three of us. Go set the table so I can platter the curry." Hisashi pointed to their table with his spoon. 𝗧𝗪𝗧 clumsily put out the placemats, chopsticks, and tea set. He grabbed the kettle and put some tea leaves and water in there, steaming it on the stove. A knock on the door prompted Hisashi to quickly place the plates at the table and answer it. "Good evening, Yamada." Aizawa Sakachi nodded in greeting. "Hey, Ʋchiai, come on in." Hisashi moved to the side and let the detective in, closing and locking the door. "Now, I know you only asked to see the Midoriya Izuku case file, but I brought the Midoriya family case file. It has everything you need." He brought out a beige folder, only a few centimeters thick. "Straight to the point, huh?" Hisashi chuckled. He knew Tsukachi and 𝗧𝗪𝗧 got along well because neither of them wasted time on unnecessary greetings or chit-chat. "Well, you two can do that after dinner," Hisashi said, taking the folder and putting it on the counter. "Zashi, we don't need." 𝗧𝗪𝗧's protest was interrupted by him getting tapped on the nose by Hisashi. "No, sit down, you need food to heal. Also, look at poor Tsukachi. He came all the way here to help you. Feed him like a good host." He invited Tsukachi to sit and eat, an action gratefully accepted by the tired detective. 𝗧𝗪𝗧 went to grab the kettle and pour some tea, trying to stop himself from pouring boiling water on himself. He set it down on the table, exasperated. "When are these casts coming off?" he groaned, Hisashi taking over the task and pouring the tea of all of them. "After the sports festival, Kay. It's because you keep trying to use your arms while they heal," Hisashi answered, his boyfriend apparently content with the response. ________. The three of them ate dinner together in tranquil silence, like they usually did. Hisashi had pop songs playing on the radio, and they enjoyed the music during their dining. When dinner was over and cleaned up, Hisashi recorded some things for the Put Your Hands Up radio, mostly transitions his manager recommended, such as, "The next song's so awesome," and a few more sentences with a couple English words thrown in. During Hisashi's recording session, Tsukachi and 𝗧𝗪𝗧 stayed at the table to look at the case file. Midoriya family case marked cold on 21-20, February 28th. Report filed by Officer Haruto Sato on 18th of September. 1 Bakugo Mitsuki filed a missing report for Mrs. Midoriya Izuku. The reason being that she had missed their daily commute. They took a quotidian route together to bring their children to school. They were neighbors and best friends for life. Officer Sato took on this case and found that Mrs. Midoriya did not arrive to work the morning of September 18th, and her son, Midoriya Izuku, did not arrive at his kindergarten. The case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. Masagaki Primary School later contacted the police on the 19th of September for a welfare check on Mrs. Midoriya Izuku and Midoriya Izuku. Mrs. Midoriya failed to respond to their calls about Midoriya Izuku's absences, which was described as uncharacteristic for her. Officer Sato performed the welfare check on Mrs. Midoriya later that day. There was no answer to the questions officers' knocks on the door or his calls, so he then used his quirk, locksmith, to open the door. Reinforcements were contacted. Emergency medical technicians arrived along with a fire truck after he concluded his search. Officer Sato walked in and experienced an immediate feeling of distress. The apartment was quiet, uncommon due to the 5-year-old that lived there. It was dark, and as he looked around the living room, he felt more uneasy. There were faint dust spots indicating picture frames were taken or moved, and the only pictures he saw of Mrs. Midoriya were ripped. There was a picture frame he saw with Mrs. Midoriya holding what seemed to be her son, but the face and head were ripped out of the frame. The same occurrence with several other images. The officer called out for Mrs. Midoriya and her son. When he received no response, he furthered deeper into the apartment. All doors were closed, so he opened them one by one as he searched. The first be opened was a bathroom door. He saw no sign of accommodations for a child, and only recognized one toothbrush. There was a toothbrush storage cup with 2 slots, one of the brushes appealingly missing. He left and entered the master bedroom, looking around and calling out for Mrs. Midoriya once more. There was no response. Officer Sato walked to the door he assumed was Midoriya Izuku's room, opening it. The room was filled with All Might merchandise, but the officer saw no other toys or pictures other than those of All Might. Mrs. Midoriya was on the ground, eyes open and unmoving. Officer Sato immediately went to check her pulse and found it cold. The reinforcements came. "Here's the autopsy report on her." Sakachi sighed and brought out the report, handing it to 𝗧𝗪. Autopsy report: name of the deceased, Midoriya Izuku, age, 30, sex, female, 𝗏𝗏, July 9th, 21, Roman 20, height, 160 centimeters, hair, green eyes, green. Quirk: attraction of small objects, occupation, nurse at Musutafu General Hospital, type of death, found death, violent, reason for autopsy, ordered law enforcement, marks and wounds, blunt force trauma found on the top left side of the head, bruises found on throat, broken neck, post-mortem wounds, fractal wounds on femur, 4 broken ribs along with dislocated jaw, ruptured spleen and stomach due to repeated trauma to abdominal region, blunt force trauma to forehead. Probable cause of death: asphyxiation and broken neck. Manner of death: homicide. Jesus, 𝗧𝗪𝗧. So hateful, he gave the paper back, uneasy. Yes, Sakachi nodded, grabbing another paper from the folder. They suspected her husband, Midoriya Hisashi, at first, but all records of his existence were expunged. It's like he wasn't even a real person. Anything on the kid? 𝗧𝗪 kept eye contact when he was handed another paper. Yeah, that's about Midoriya Izuku. He pointed to the paper in 𝗧𝗪's hands. Missing child report. Name: Midoriya Izuku, age, 5, sex, male, 𝗏𝗏, July 15th, 21, Roman 20, height, 109 centimeters, hair, green eyes, green. Quirk: no description, curly green hair and freckles. Responds to Deku. Last seen on 21 Roman 20, September 18th. Might be in the area of Musutafu. If you have any information on the person above, please contact Musutafu Police Station. Here is a good picture of him. Sakachi grabbed the picture his kindergarten took for their scrapbook. It was of Midoriya Izuku playing with another kid, making a sand castle. I think that's him. 𝗧𝗪 took the picture and looked closer. He recognized the kid's face, concentrated on making the sand castle. Izuku's baby fat still sat on his cheeks, even in his teenage years. They had the same eyes and freckles, but the 5-year-old didn't have a scar on his jaw. Are you sure? Sakachi looked through the folder, trying to find if they had an age progression of the kid. Ah, hold on. We've got one. He brought it out, relieved. Kageno wasn't very high resolution in the camera footage, but Sakachi was almost certain Midoriya Izuku was Kageno. One what? Hisashi asked, looking up from the book he was reading to see the excitement. An age progression photo, the detective answered. It's Midoriya Izuku at age 13. They made it 2 years ago. He handed it to 𝗧𝗪, who accepted it with wide eyes. It's him, 𝗧𝗪 said. We've got a name. He smiled slightly. That's a lot of progress. Shoo, Hisashi smiled, going back to reading. It wasn't his case, so he didn't have much to say about it. Let's do some brainstorming, yeah? Sakachi said, referencing the Midoriya case. Yeah, let's, Aizawa nodded. ________. The two spent a few more hours talking about what might have happened. They figured it was a personal attack because of all the post-mortem marks 𝐒𝐭 had. They weren't any closer to finding out who killed her and took Izuku, but they were a little more informed about how to approach Kageno. Due to things his teacher said, 𝗧𝗪 and Sakachi believed Izuku had anxiety. He was unlikely to talk to anyone unless they talked to him. He avoided eye contact and didn't like his classmates. Izuku was a timid boy, but was always described as kind and polite. Aizawa was more than relieved with their findings. They learned more about Kageno's personality than ever. Although they weren't any closer to helping the kid, progress was progress. If they saw Kageno again, they might be able to help him. Dear Eraserhead, I'm not sure if you have the letter I left you with, but if you do, please get rid of it. I know it's been a while since then, but still, I hope you didn't hand it in to the police. It's important for you to stop it from getting out to the traitor. I saw your arms are still in casts, which confused doesn't really make sense because 𝗂𝗏 has one of the top healing heroes in Japan. It would be easier for you to save energy and then heal all your injuries in one go. Sincerely, Kageno. When Izuku was brought back, He was left alone with 𝐴ll-for-one despite his pleading. "Kurogiri, please stay, please," he begged. "That's enough, Izuku. Leave now," 𝐴ll-for-one ordered Kurogiri. He stayed sitting on the floor, shaking and trying to prevent a panic attack. He zoned out. Not hearing anything but the alarms going off inside his head, Izuku started paying attention when he heard the sound of 𝐴ll-for-one snapping his fingers, trying to get Izuku back into reality. "Are you done?" he asked, Izuku nodding in response. 𝐴ll-for-one hummed and started talking again. "Now, I will not say this again. Got it?" he said, staring at Izuku. "Yes, sir," the teen replied, nodding attentively. "Good." 𝐴ll-for-one stood up, leaving his oxygen mask on his chair. "Wait, your mask, are you gonna be okay?" Izuku quickly stood up and looked between his father and the mask, worried. "Yes, my dear. I will be fine for a few minutes." He walked closer to his son, smiling. "You know I love you, yes?" the man asked and waved Izuku over. "Of course," he said, walking toward 𝐴ll-for-one. He knew his father had some sort of care for him, or else he would have been dead by then. "And you know I would prefer keeping you safe rather than hurting you?" He put on a concerned expression, frowning. "Yeah," Izuku tried to prevent flinching when 𝐴ll-for-one lifted his hand and patted his head. The man had said he liked Izuku's hair because the curls matched his. "So you must understand, everything I do is for your sake. Tamura is making the world better for you. But to do that, he needs you." Izuku felt his chest tighten in guilt. "I'm sorry," he looked down, avoiding eye contact. "You do realize you made Tamura very upset?" "Yes," the man scolded. "You must fix that. I'm afraid you need to be punished yet again," he sighed. "Yes, sir," Izuku easily agreed. He had no trouble comforting Tamura. "Good boy," 𝐴ll-for-one said, pulling Izuku into a hug that he was hesitant to return. 𝐴ll-for-one grinned, but dropped the smile before pulling away from the teen. "If you misuse transfer once more, it will be taken away." "Understood?" Izuku nodded. He knew what was coming when he ran, but he wasn't expecting his father to be so nice. His chest felt warm, and he felt more regretful for trying to leave. 𝐴ll-for-one smiled, ruffling Izuku's hair before calling for Kurogiri to pick the teen up. Izuku walked through the portal and entered his room. He was then locked in while Kurogiri went to have a private talk with Izuku's father. "Sir, may I ask, why the leniency?" Kurogiri was confused, watching as 𝐴ll-for-one sat down again. "Well, he was smart by getting away again. I did not expect that. Now that you are here," he grinned. "My deepest apology, sir. I wasn't entirely sure whether to aid Shigaraki Tamura or to bring back the young master." Kurogiri bowed in remorse. "Next time, make Izuku a priority," the man instructed. "Tamura is not nearly as salient as my son. I am sure you know that." "Yes." 𝐴ll-for-one sighed. "Now, go tell Izuku to rest. I want him to do some sparring soon," he commanded. "Yes, master. I understand." Kurogiri nodded and left as he was ordered to, heading back to the bar. After Kurogiri's talk with 𝐴ll-for-one, the mist man did as told. Izuku agreed to go to sleep, but before he did, he decided he should write a letter to Eraserhead. The man likely had a very important piece of information in his possession. He quickly scribbled out a proposal for the hero, writing it while thinking about how he probably won't be able to give it to Eraser for a while. After Izuku finished it, he signed the letter with his alias and put it into his dresser drawer. Kurogiri told him to go to sleep as soon as possible, so he tried. It wasn't hard since he had been overusing his quirk and running all night. He woke up the next day in the early morning, well rested. He had a higher sense of clarity than the night before, which made it easier for him to think about what happened. Izuku figured Tamura didn't tell 𝐴ll-for-one why he ran away, because if he did, the man would be livid. He always had a strong hatred for 𝐭. Izuku knew why, but that didn't mean he thought it excusable. Though, that didn't mean 𝐴ll-for-one would never find out. Eraserhead most likely had the letter Izuku wrote. Speaking of Eraserhead, he really should have been healed by then. Recovery Girl's quirk used the injured person's energy to quicken their healing process. Yes, it takes their stamina, and it's dangerous for her to use it for life-threatening injuries. But if Aizawa could get up and walk around, he should be able to get healed by her. It would be better for her to heal him as soon as possible. He probably needed to train his students for the US Sports Festival. That isn't important right now, Izuku thought, groaning. He pondered about how he should apologize to 𝗵𝗲. Izuku had never used a quirk against him. 𝐴ll4𝐴 told Izuku that 𝗵𝗲 was a bit juvenile, but that he should treat the man with respect. 𝗵𝗲 had always been a familial figure for Izuku. They only met a few times in their younger years, but they got along well. He taught Izuku how to play his first video game. On account of their caring relationship, Izuku seldomly felt any negativity toward 𝗵𝗲. He always thought it wasn't the man's fault he was raised as a villain. Izuku and 𝗵𝗲 had arguments, but Izuku was still worried. He didn't know how 𝗵𝗲 would react to Izuku choosing 𝐭𝐽 over him. He opened his bedroom door, heading into the hallway without bothering to check the time. When the bar came into sight, he saw no sign of 𝗵𝗲. Kurogiri was behind the bar, standing like a robot that was powered off. "Good morning, young master," the man nodded, waiting for a command from Izuku. "G-morning," he responded, looking around. "Why wasn't my door locked? Is 𝗵𝗲 playing games in his room?" More questions were poking at his brain, but he figured asking two would suffice for now. 𝗓𝗏 requested your door be open. Shigaraki 𝗵𝗲 has not been out of his room since last night. Izuku frowned. 𝗵𝗲 stayed in his room as long as possible when he was going through a depressive episode, and that meant he barely ate or drank. He never liked when he and Izuku fought. Izuku turned around and went to 𝗵𝗲's door, knocking. "𝗵𝗲, are you awake?" No response. "I'm sorry, really. I'm so sorry. Can we please talk?" He didn't want to invade the man's privacy, but it was dangerous for him to go without food or water. "I'm gonna come in, okay?" There wasn't a response of protest, so he entered. 𝗵𝗲 was lying on his side, staring at the wall next to his bed. The first thing Izuku did was turn on the lamp that sat on Tomu's bedside table. A groan came from the bed and Izuku saw the man bury his face in a pillow. Well, you don't have to respond, but I'm going to talk either way." He sat down next to the bed with his back to the wall. "I'm sorry I used my quirk against you. It was spur of the moment. I was being dumb. I never want to do that again. I despise hurting you." Izuku spoke as honestly as he could. "I'm not going to that again, I promise." 𝗵𝗲 flipped over so he was facing Izuku, holding out his pinky finger. "You promise?" "Of course," the teen smiled, doing the same. They locked their fingers and did the common gesture of a pinky promise. "You're right. You were being dumb. But it's okay. You're still a kid so you can get smarter." He ruffled Izuku's hair, huffing and sitting up. "It's boring laying here all day anyway." "Yeah, sounds like it." Izuku stood up when 𝗵𝗲 did and followed the man. "There's still like a week before the sports festival. What are we gonna do?" He slumped into one of his bean bags, grabbing a controller. "Well, I think we should get some vitamin D." Izuku sat down as well. "That's not a real thing," 𝗵𝗲 said as he scoffed. He threw a second controller to Izuku and told him to choose a game to play. "If you say so." Izuku chose a puzzle game, much to 𝗵𝗲's chagrin. "God, you're so boring," the man groaned. He preferred the action or shooting games. They were a better escapism tactic for him. Izuku, on the other hand, did not like games where the player hurts people. "We can play something else." Izuku didn't want 𝗵𝗲 to be upset so quickly after their disagreement. "Whatever, I don't care." They spent a good bit of the day playing games together, a common pastime for them. 𝗵𝗲 mindlessly told Izuku about random thoughts he had. This included facts about the video game they were playing, foods he wanted Kurogiri to make, and his plans for the UA Sports Festival. 𝗵𝗲 mentioned he just wanted to watch, so he could see which students were the strongest. This was unsurprising, but Izuku thought the man might want to do more than just watch. The teen told 𝗵𝗲 he also wanted to watch, and he responded by saying Izuku could only watch if 𝗓𝗏 said it was okay. For the next few days, the two repeated this pattern. Izuku got more bonding time with 𝗵𝗲, so he felt comfortable enough to ask a question. "Why didn't you tell my father I was going to see my 𝐒𝐴𝐵?" he asked, looking away from the game they were playing. 𝗵𝗲 hesitated. "I didn't want him to take you away again," he said with a frustrated expression. "Last time, I couldn't talk to you for a whole month. It was so stupid," he groaned. "I didn't even care that much about what you did." "Thank you." Izuku leaned over to hug 𝗵𝗲. He wished the man could have been able to grow up with his family. If the world wasn't so obsessed with heroic quirks, They would realize the very quirks they discriminate against could be used to save lives. Imagine it, someone trapped under rubble. Maybe something happened, and it was dangerous for the heroes to move the rubble. Tamura's quirk could safely help the person by decaying it. Many such instances are likely. Tamura was a good person. Izuku knew that, deep inside his aggressive persona. The man was kind and caring. The greatest villain in Japan saw that sprouting hero and decided to take advantage. Izuku was growing vexed, thinking about the if-onlys. "Hey, the hell are you thinking about? You've been hugging me for like a minute." "Stop," Tamura hissed and pushed the teen to the floor. "Sorry," Izuku chuckled nervously. "I was just thinking about heroes." It was technically the truth. "Yeah, you looked mad," he scoffed. "Just don't do that then." "You're right." Izuku sat back in his beanbag, playing more games with Tamura. Be present, Izuku thought. You have to help Tamura. Aizawa shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the silence that filled the teacher's lounge. He was waiting to speak with Nezu. The principal was currently having a meeting with Tsukachi. The other pro heroes were teaching their various classes, or doing hero work. But 𝗧𝗪 had a grading period and was alone. "Aizawa, thank you for being patient." Nezu entered the lounge, grinning. "I spoke to Tsukachi. There's some preparations I wanted to make before talking to you." He began walking out and 𝗧𝗪 followed quickly. Like what, exactly? The hero wasn't up for Nezu's mind games. His students were overly excited since his announcement of the sports festival. He was tired. "You'll see." The principal's grin widened. He was planning something. When the two entered the principal's office, Nezu began explaining. "I recognize that you might feel the need to look after Midoriya Izuku, especially after finding out the history of his disappearance," he said, and down on his couch, motioning for Aizawa to do the same. "I wouldn't say that," the tired hero mumbled, following Nezu's directions. "Yes, well, I would," he smiled. "Detective Tsukachi and I both agree that Kageno should not be treated as a villain, but as a victim. The preparations I made are in regards to that." He poured himself and 𝗧𝗪 a cup of tea. "I recall him helping you during the SG, and it seems he has an attachment to you as well. Do you see what I'm implying?" Nezu tilted his head in question. "Kinda. You want me to save him?" 𝗧𝗪 inferred, a bit confused. "Somewhat. Kageno won't be with the League of Villains forever, and when he's free of them, he needs somewhere to go. I have a feeling they won't let him go easily, so we need someone strong to take care of him until he's fully safe." Nezu put it simply. "You want me to take care of him?" "Yes, you are best suited to be his caretaker at this moment. We don't even have him yet. Why are you planning so far ahead?" 𝗧𝗪 was exasperated. "We don't even know what his actual personality is like. I've conducted small interviews with people who knew him as a child. They described him to be obsessed with heroes, and would do anything to become one. I don't think he would willingly join any villain. He was the smartest hero in Japan," he could convince Aizawa. "No, that kid seems to hate law enforcement. He doesn't trust us at all," he emphasized, not wanting to take in a stubborn kid who hates heroes. Nezu smiled widely. When Aizawa got home, he was exhausted. Nezu had spent all day debating why or why not Aizawa should take care of Kageno. He eventually gave in so that he could go home. Now 𝗧𝗪 and Hisashi had to make preparations for a teenager, of whom they had no personal knowledge of. They didn't know his clothing size, his fabric preference, if he liked femininity or masculinity, what food he liked, what food he was allergic to, what sensory issues he might have, and the list goes on. Hisashi, as a person with ADHD, knew it was hard to move into a new place. It took a while until one would feel comfortable to call it home. He wanted desperately to help out Midoriya after learning that they were going to take him in. 𝗧𝗪 was tired, but he was willing to engage in his boyfriend's antics. They would make their apartment perfect.